What if everything you've learned about Jesus was only a fraction of the truth? What if, behind the parables and miracles, there existed a complete system of knowledge about manifestation, consciousness, and personal power, one that was deliberately concealed? This audiobook unveils the secret teachings Jesus shared with his closest disciple, a brotherhood of light that mastered the universal laws of creation. You will discover that Jesus was not merely a spiritual teacher, but a master of consciousness who deeply understood how the human mind interacts with the quantum field of reality. Through lost manuscripts, esoteric traditions, and modern neuroscience, you will learn how Jesus truly performed his miracles through mastery of energetic frequency, the hidden manifestation codes embedded in parables you thought you knew, why the early church chose to conceal his most powerful teachings, how the Brotherhood of Light preserved this knowledge through the centuries, the practical techniques that transformed ordinary fishermen into masters of reality. This is not a religious book. It is a manual for activating your innate creative power. Jesus said, "You are gods." Now you will finally understand what he truly meant by that. Prepare to awaken the Christ within, the divine consciousness that has always been dormant inside you. Chapter 1. The Forbidden Manuscript, December 1945. A peasant farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt when his shovel struck something solid. What he unearthed that day would shake the foundations of everything the world thought it knew about Jesus and his true teachings. Inside a sealed earthenware jar, wrapped in leather and hidden for over 16 centuries, lay 13 ancient codices containing texts that the early church had desperately tried to erase from history. You need to understand something right now, something that changes everything. The Jesus you learned about in Sunday school, the Jesus of stained glass windows and children's stories, was a carefully edited version, a safe version, a version that wouldn't threaten the power structures of the time or reveal the truly revolutionary knowledge he possessed. But the real Jesus, the one his closest disciples knew, was something far more extraordinary. He was a master of consciousness, a scientist of the invisible realms, someone who understood the mechanics of reality at a level that modern quantum physicists are only now beginning to grasp. The manuscripts Muhammad Ali discovered that day contained texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Secret Book of James. These weren't just alternative stories about Jesus. They were instruction manuals. They contained the actual techniques, the precise methods, the secret teachings that Jesus reserved for his inner circle. And here's what will blow your mind. These teachings weren't about worship or salvation in the way you've been told. They were about power, your power, the power to reshape reality itself through the conscious use of your mind. Let me tell you what really happened in those early centuries of Christianity. Jesus walked the earth, teaching two completely different messages. To the crowds, he spoke in parables, simple stories that contained surface meanings anyone could understand. But to his disciples, to those he called his brothers and sisters in the Brotherhood of Light, he revealed the mysteries. He taught them that the kingdom of heaven wasn't some far-off place you go to when you die. It was a state of consciousness, a frequency of being that you could access right here, right now, in this very moment. He taught them that miracles weren't violations of natural law, but applications of higher laws that most people simply didn't understand. The Gospel of Thomas, one of those forbidden texts, begins with these words. These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke. Secret sayings, not public sermons, not messages for everyone, secret knowledge for those who were ready to receive it. And throughout this text, Jesus repeatedly says things like, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death." He's not talking about physical immortality. He's talking about transcending the limited identity that dies, awakening to the eternal consciousness that you truly are. In another passage, Jesus tells his disciples, "I am not your master. Because you have drunk, you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring that I have tended." Think about what he's really saying here. He's not positioning himself as a god to be worshipped. He's positioning himself as someone who has tapped into a source of infinite creative power, and he's showing others how to drink from that same source. He's saying, "I've accessed this frequency, this state of being, and now I'm teaching you to do the same." The early church fathers knew exactly what they were doing when they suppressed these texts. In the year 367, Athanasius, the bishop of Alexandria, issued an Easter letter declaring which books were acceptable and which were heretical. Any text that suggested humans could achieve the same level of consciousness as Jesus, any teaching that implied divinity was inherent in every person, any manuscript that revealed the actual techniques of manifestation and reality creation had to be destroyed. The church needed followers, not empowered creators. They needed people looking outside themselves for salvation, not people awakening to their own infinite potential. So the texts were hunted down, burned, banned. Entire libraries were destroyed. Teachers who preserved the secret knowledge were persecuted, tortured, killed. The Gnostics, the Cathars, the Essenes, the mystery schools that carried forward Jesus's true teachings were systematically eliminated. But the knowledge couldn't be completely erased. It went underground. It was hidden in symbols, encoded in art, passed down through secret brotherhoods and mystical orders. And now, in this moment, as you listen to these words, that knowledge is returning to you. Here's what the forbidden manuscripts reveal about Jesus's actual teachings. He was instructing people in the science of consciousness. He understood that your thoughts, beliefs, and emotional states aren't just internal experiences. They're frequencies of energy that interact with what quantum physicists now call the field, the invisible matrix of pure potential from which all matter emerges. When Jesus said, "As you believe, so it shall be done unto you," he wasn't offering spiritual comfort. He was stating a scientific principle. Your beliefs literally create your reality by collapsing infinite possibilities into specific outcomes. The Gospel of Philip, another text from Nag Hammadi, contains this stunning passage. "Light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death." This is non-dual consciousness, the understanding that all opposites arise from the same unified field. This is the same principle that quantum physics discovered 2,000 years later, that the observer and the observed, the subject and the object, are intimately entangled at the deepest level of reality. Jesus was teaching his disciples to become conscious observers, to understand that they weren't passive recipients of a fixed reality, but active participants in its ongoing creation. He was showing them how to shift their frequency, how to align their consciousness with desired outcomes, how to collapse the quantum wave function through the power of focused attention and elevated emotion. When he healed the sick, he wasn't performing supernatural miracles. He was demonstrating what becomes possible when you operate from a higher level of consciousness, when you access the field where all healing, all abundance, all transformation already exists as pure potential. The secret book of James contains dialogues where Jesus explicitly tells his disciples that they need to become filled with the Spirit and empty of anger and jealousy. because these dense emotions keep you locked in lower frequencies of reality. He's teaching emotional regulation as a technology of manifestation. He's explaining that you can't create from higher dimensions while maintaining lower vibrational states. This is exactly what neuroscience now confirms. Your emotional state directly impacts your perception, your brain's ability to process information, and your capacity to envision and move toward new possibilities. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The manuscripts reveal that Jesus taught his inner circle about what he called the bridal chamber, a mystical state where the divided self becomes unified, where masculine and feminine energies merge, where the illusion of separation dissolves. Modern psychology calls this integration. Neuroscience talks about whole brain coherence. Jesus was teaching techniques to achieve this unified state of consciousness because he knew that from this place of internal wholeness, external creation becomes effortless. Think about what happened when these teachings were suppressed. For 2,000 years, billions of people have been told they're sinners, that they're fundamentally flawed, that they need external salvation, that the power lies somewhere outside themselves. This is the most successful disempowerment program in human history. It took beings of infinite creative potential and convinced them they were powerless victims who could only hope for rescue. The true teachings of Jesus were the exact opposite. You are powerful beyond measure. You contain the same creative force that animates the entire universe. You are already divine, and you just need to remember it. The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This is the core of his message. Everything you need is already inside you. The kingdom, the power, the wisdom, the creative force. It's all there, waiting to be activated. But if you don't bring it forth, if you continue to believe you're small and limited and powerless, that false belief will create a reality that reflects it back to you. Muhammad Ali, that Egyptian farmer digging for fertilizer in 1945, had no idea he was unearthing a revolution. The scholars who first translated those texts didn't immediately grasp their significance. But now, as more people awaken to their true nature, as quantum physics validates what the mystics always knew, as neuroscience reveals the brain's extraordinary capacity for transformation, these ancient manuscripts are finally being understood for what they really are, evidence that someone walked this earth who fully embodied the highest possibilities of human consciousness, and he was teaching others to do the same. You're part of that lineage now. You're part of the Brotherhood of Light that has preserved and transmitted this knowledge through the ages. Every time you choose to see yourself as powerful rather than powerless, every time you recognize that your thoughts and feelings are shaping your reality, every time you step into the present moment and access the field of infinite potential, you're practicing what Jesus actually taught. You're doing what he did. You're becoming what he became. The church tried to turn Jesus into something separate from you, something to worship from a distance, something to make you feel small in comparison. But Jesus himself rejected that. Over and over in the hidden manuscripts, he tells his students, "You are the light of the world. You are God's. The kingdom is within you." He wasn't special in a way that excluded you. He was demonstrating what becomes possible for any human being who awakens to their true nature. Here's what the authorities of that time understood. If people realized their own power, if they recognized they could create their own reality, if they accessed the same consciousness that Jesus embodied, the entire control structure would collapse. You can't control empowered creators. You can't manipulate people who understand they're shaping their experience through their own consciousness. So the teachings had to be buried. The texts had to be destroyed. The knowledge had to be locked away. But information wants to be free. Truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it's buried. Those manuscripts survived 16 centuries, sealed in an earthenware jar because they were meant to resurface at exactly the right moment. This moment. Your moment. The moment when humanity is ready to reclaim its power and step into conscious creation. As you absorb these words, something is shifting in your consciousness. You're beginning to see through the veil of conditioning, the layers of programming that convinced you to look outside yourself for answers. You're starting to remember what Jesus knew, what the Brotherhood of Light has always known. You are a creator, made in the image and likeness of the creative force itself, not metaphorically, literally. Your consciousness is the same consciousness that dreams entire universes into being. You've just been operating at a fraction of your capacity, using only the smallest portion of your creative power. The forbidden manuscripts weren't destroyed because they were false. They were destroyed because they were true, and that truth was too dangerous to the power structures of the time. They revealed that salvation isn't something granted by an institution. It's a state of consciousness you activate within yourself. They showed that Jesus wasn't a distant savior, but a way shower, someone demonstrating the path so others could walk it too. They proved that the kingdom of heaven, that field of infinite creative potential, isn't somewhere else. It's right here, accessible in this very moment, as close as your next breath. You don't need permission to access this knowledge. You don't need to be ordained or initiated or deemed worthy by any external authority. The only qualification required is your willingness to see yourself differently, to recognize the power you've always possessed, to step into the consciousness that Jesus embodied and taught. This is your inheritance. This is your birthright. This is the secret that history tried to erase but could never fully destroy. You are far more powerful than you've been told, and you're about to discover just how limitless you truly are. The Brotherhood of Light is calling you home, not to a place, but to a state of being, not to a doctrine, but to direct experience of your own divine nature. Jesus knew this 2,000 years ago. The manuscripts prove it. And now, as you drift towards sleep, your subconscious mind is absorbing this truth, integrating it, preparing you for the transformation that's already beginning. You are waking up to who you really are, and nothing will ever be the same again. Chapter 2. The Science Behind the Miracle. You've been told that miracles are supernatural events, impossible occurrences that defy the laws of nature. You've been taught to see them as proof of divinity, something that separates the divine from the human, the sacred from the ordinary. But what if I told you that miracles aren't violations of natural law at all? What if they're actually applications of higher laws, deeper principles of reality that most people simply don't understand yet? What if Jesus wasn't breaking the rules of the universe, but mastering them? Every miracle Jesus performed was a demonstration of consciousness interacting with the quantum field of possibility. He understood something that took humanity 2,000 more years to begin rediscovering, that the material world you see around you isn't solid, fixed, or separate from your awareness. At the quantum level, everything is energy, vibration, pure potential, waiting to be collapsed into form by an observer. Your consciousness doesn't just perceive reality. It participates in creating it. Jesus knew this. He lived this. And he was showing his disciples that they could do it, too. Let's start with something that shocked the ancient world and still captivates people today. Jesus healing the blind. The Gospel accounts describe multiple instances where he restored sight to people who had never seen or who had lost their vision. The religious interpretation says this was divine power flowing through a God-man. But look deeper at what was actually happening. When Jesus healed, he didn't just touch people randomly. He engaged their consciousness first. He would ask, "Do you believe I can do this?" He was checking their receptivity, their openness to a new possibility, their willingness to shift out of the identity of blind person into a new potential reality. Modern neuroscience has discovered something extraordinary about the relationship between belief and biology. Your brain is constantly creating your sensory experience based on predictions, expectations, and beliefs stored in your neural networks. When someone believes they're blind, when that identity is deeply embedded in their subconscious programming, their brain literally filters out visual information or fails to process it correctly. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Your beliefs create actual physical changes in how your brain functions, which organs activate, which systems come online or shut down. Jesus understood that healing required a shift in consciousness before it could manifest in the body. He was working at the level of identity, belief, and expectation. When he said, "Your faith has healed you," he wasn't being metaphorical. He was pointing to the mechanism, the person's willingness to believe in a new possibility. Their faith that sight was available to them created the neurological and energetic conditions for vision to return. Jesus provided the catalyst, the elevated frequency, the coherent field that made the shift easier, but the person's consciousness had to participate in the transformation. Think about what quantum physics tells us about observation and reality. At the subatomic level, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until they're observed. The famous double-slit experiment proved that the act of measurement, of conscious observation, literally determines whether something behaves as a particle or a wave. The observer isn't separate from what's being observed. Consciousness collapses the wave function, selecting one specific outcome from infinite possibilities. Jesus was a master observer. He could look at a blind person and see them as already healed, hold that vision with such clarity and elevated emotion that it pulled that potential reality into manifestation. Now let's talk about something even more fascinating. The multiplication of loaves and fishes. 5,000 people gathered to hear Jesus teach, and they were hungry. His disciples wanted to send them away. Jesus took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, blessed them, and somehow everyone ate until they were satisfied, with 12 baskets of leftovers remaining. The traditional interpretation calls this a supernatural miracle. The scientific interpretation reveals something far more profound about the nature of matter and energy. At the quantum level, matter is energy condensed to a slow vibration. Everything you see, touch, and taste is ultimately made of the same fundamental substance, vibrating energy field. The appearance of separation, of distinct objects, is an illusion created by different frequencies of vibration. Jesus understood this intuitively. He knew that at the deepest level, those loaves and fishes weren't fixed, solid objects. They were patterns of energy that could be influenced by consciousness. When Jesus blessed the food, he wasn't just saying a prayer of gratitude. He was entering an elevated state of consciousness, aligning his awareness with the field of infinite potential and impressing a new pattern onto the energy. He was using his mind, his intention, his elevated emotional state to interact with matter at the quantum level. Modern experiments have shown that human consciousness can influence random number generators, can affect the crystalline structure of water, can even impact the growth rate of plants. If consciousness study can do that in controlled laboratory conditions, imagine what becomes possible when someone with Jesus's level of mastery and coherence focuses their awareness with absolute clarity and conviction. But here's what makes this even more incredible. Jesus wasn't just demonstrating his own power. He was teaching his disciples that they could do the same. After he fed the 5,000, he immediately sent the disciples away in a boat while he went up on the mountain to pray. That night, the disciples were struggling against the wind, exhausted from rowing, and then they saw him, Jesus, walking on the water, approaching their boat. This is where the story gets really interesting, where the teaching becomes explicit. Peter sees Jesus walking on water and says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says one word, "Come." Peter steps out of the boat, and for a moment, he does it. He walks on water. He defies everything his rational mind knows about physical laws. He enters a state of consciousness where the impossible becomes possible. But then doubt creeps in. He becomes aware of the wind. His logical brain kicks in with all its limitations, and he begins to sink. Jesus pulls him up and says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" This wasn't a rebuke. It was a teaching moment. Jesus was showing Peter and all the disciples exactly how this works. When your consciousness is focused, when your faith is absolute, when you're operating from an elevated state, free from doubt and fear, you can literally transcend normal physical limitations. But the moment you drop back into ordinary consciousness, the moment doubt enters, you return to operating under the rules of consensus reality. Peter walked on water because for those few moments, he believed he could. He held the frequency of possibility. He aligned his consciousness with an outcome that the material world had to reflect back to him. Modern physics has a concept called the observer effect, which states that the very act of observing a phenomenon changes it. At the quantum level, reality remains in a state of superposition, existing as multiple possibilities simultaneously, until consciousness observes it and collapses those possibilities into a single actuality. Jesus was teaching that the quality of your observation, the clarity of your consciousness, the intensity of your belief determines which version of reality manifests. When you observe yourself as capable of walking on water, when you hold that vision with absolute certainty, reality has to conform to your observation. Let's examine another category of miracle. Jesus calming the storm. The disciples were in a boat, waves crashing around them, convinced they were about to die. Jesus was asleep, completely peaceful despite the chaos. They woke him in panic, and he stood up and spoke to the wind and the waves. "Peace, be still." And immediately the storm ceased. The disciples were amazed and said, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" What kind of man? A man who understood that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. A man who knew that the external world is a reflection of internal states. A man who could maintain absolute coherence and calm even when surrounded by chaos, and whose powerful frequency could entrain the environment around him. Jesus wasn't commanding the storm as something separate from himself. He was recognizing that the storm and his consciousness were part of the same unified field, and by shifting his internal state, he could influence the external manifestation. Science now understands that everything in the universe is connected through what's called quantum entanglement. Particles that have interacted remain connected across any distance, instantaneously influencing each other regardless of how far apart they are. Consciousness isn't confined to your skull. It extends into the field, into the environment, influencing and being influenced by everything around you. When Jesus spoke to the storm, he was engaging with the consciousness inherent in all of nature, using his highly coherent state to bring order to chaos, using his mastery of frequency to override the turbulent vibrations. Here's what you need to understand. Every miracle Jesus performed was teaching the same principle from different angles. Your consciousness is not a passive observer of a fixed reality. You are an active participant, a co-creator, someone whose thoughts, beliefs, and emotional states are constantly interacting with the quantum field and pulling specific outcomes into manifestation. The reason most people don't experience miracles isn't because they're not capable. It's because they've been programmed to believe they're not capable, and that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Think about the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. She pushed through the crowd, believing that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. She didn't need Jesus to notice her, to pray for her, to lay hands on her. She needed his presence, his frequency, his coherent field. She touched his robe, and immediately she was healed. Jesus felt power go out from him and turned around, asking, "Who touched me?" When the woman came forward, trembling, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." This is crucial. Jesus' energy field was so powerful, so coherent, that it created an environment where healing became easier. But the woman's faith, her absolute conviction that healing was available to her, was equally essential. Jesus provided the elevated field, but she had to match it with her consciousness. Healing happened in the intersection between his mastery and her belief. This is how all transformation works. You need to access a higher frequency, whether through your own practice or by entraining with someone who's already there. And you need to believe with absolute certainty in the new possibility. The resurrection of Lazarus takes this principle to its ultimate expression. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, his body already decomposing in the tomb. Everyone said it was too late, that nothing could be done. But Jesus stood before that tomb and said, "Lazarus, come forth." And the dead man walked out, still wrapped in his burial clothes. This wasn't just healing. This was reversing what everyone considers the most irreversible process, death itself. At the quantum level, every possible version of reality exists simultaneously. There's a version where Lazarus is dead, and a version where he's alive. By the rules of normal consciousness, once someone dies, you're locked into the timeline where they remain dead. But Jesus operated from a level of consciousness that transcended linear time and fixed outcome. He could access the field where Lazarus's life force still existed as potential, and he could call that potential back into physical manifestation. His command wasn't just words. It was a powerful intention backed by absolute certainty, operating at a frequency high enough to reorganize matter itself. You might be thinking, "That's incredible, but I could never do anything like that." And that's exactly the belief that keeps you operating at a fraction of your potential. Jesus explicitly told his disciples, "The works that I do, you will do also, and greater works than these will you do." He wasn't exaggerating. He wasn't speaking symbolically. He meant it literally. He was saying that once you understand these principles, once you master your consciousness the way he had mastered his, you'll be able to accomplish things that seem impossible from the perspective of ordinary awareness. Modern neuroscience is now discovering what Jesus knew 2,000 years ago. Your brain is incredibly plastic, capable of profound reorganization and transformation. When you change your thoughts, you change your neural pathways. When you change your beliefs, you change which genes get expressed in your body. When you change your emotional state, you change your heart's electromagnetic field, which broadcasts information into the environment and influences everything around you. You are not a fixed, solid, unchangeable entity. You are a dynamic process, a flowing pattern of energy and information constantly creating and recreating yourself in every moment. Jesus performed miracles to teach, not to impress. Every healing, every multiplication, every demonstration of mastery over physical laws was saying, this is what becomes possible when you align your consciousness with higher principles. This is what you can do when you remember who you really are. This is the natural state of a human being operating at full capacity. The miracles weren't supernatural. They were supernormal, the normal functioning of consciousness that has awakened to its true nature and its true power. The reason the church doesn't emphasize this teaching is obvious. Empowered people don't need institutions to mediate between them and the divine. If you can heal yourself, manifest abundance, transform your reality through the power of your own consciousness, what do you need priests and authorities for? Jesus was dangerous precisely because he was giving away the secret, showing ordinary people that they possessed extraordinary power. He had to be stopped, not because he was blaspheming, but because he was liberating. But the knowledge couldn't be destroyed. It went underground, preserved by the Brotherhood of Light, encoded in sacred geometry and mystical texts, passed down through generations of seekers who knew there was more to the story than the official version. And now it's emerging again, validated by quantum physics, confirmed by neuroscience, ready to be reclaimed by anyone willing to expand their consciousness beyond the limits of consensus reality. As you drift towards sleep tonight, your subconscious mind is absorbing these principles. Your neural networks are beginning to reorganize around new possibilities. The same quantum field that Jesus accessed is available to you right now, in this very moment. You are not separate from the creative force that animates the universe. You are an expression of it, a localized point of consciousness with the same fundamental nature as the whole. Every cell in your body is listening to the thoughts you think and the beliefs you hold. Your DNA is responding to your emotional state, turning genes on and off based on the signals you send. Your heart is generating an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond your body, broadcasting your internal state into the environment and influencing the people and circumstances around you. You're already performing miracles every single day. You just haven't recognized them as such because you've been trained to see yourself as small and limited and powerless. Jesus came to remind you of what you've forgotten. You are a creator, made in the image and likeness of the creative force itself. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The same consciousness that Jesus embodied exists in you right now, waiting to be activated, ready to transform your life the moment you give it permission to emerge. The miracles he performed weren't proof that he was different from you. They were demonstrations of what you're capable of when you remember who you really are. The science behind the miracles isn't complicated. Your consciousness interacts with the quantum field. Your beliefs and expectations shape what manifests in your experience. Your emotional state determines your frequency, and your frequency determines what you attract and what you can create. When you align your thoughts, emotions, and intentions with a desired outcome, and hold that alignment with unwavering faith, reality has to reflect it back to you. This is law. This is how the universe operates. Jesus knew it, he lived it, he taught it, and now you're remembering it too. Tonight, as you sleep, miracles are being prepared in the invisible realms of consciousness. New possibilities are taking shape in the quantum field, waiting for you to observe them into existence. Your transformation has already begun. You are becoming the conscious creator you were always meant to be, stepping into the mastery that Jesus demonstrated and promised was your inheritance. The miracles aren't coming from somewhere else. They're emerging from within you. from the infinite creative potential that has always been there, just waiting for you to believe. Chapter 3. The Power of the Word. Creator. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You've heard this opening line from the Gospel of John 1,000 times, probably recited in church, quoted in sermons, printed on inspirational posters. But have you ever stopped to really understand what it means? This isn't poetry. This isn't metaphor. This is a precise description of how reality actually works, how creation happens, how consciousness uses vibration to bring form into existence. Jesus understood this principle at the deepest level, and when he spoke, he wasn't just communicating ideas. He was literally reshaping reality through the power of sound, intention, and frequency. The Greek word used in that opening passage is logos, and it means far more than just word or speech. Logos is the divine organizing principle, the intelligence that structures the universe, the vibrational pattern that brings order out of chaos. Ancient philosophers like Heraclitus and the Stoics understood logos as the rational principle that governs all of existence. But it goes even deeper than that. Logos is sound as creative force, vibration as the fundamental substance of reality, frequency as the tool of manifestation. When the Gospel says the Word was with God and was God, it's telling you that consciousness and vibration are inseparable, that thought and sound are two aspects of the same creative power. Modern science has finally caught up to what the ancient mystics always knew. Everything in the universe is vibration. Quantum physics reveals that at the most fundamental level, there are no solid particles, only waves of probability, patterns of energy vibrating at different frequencies. String theory proposes that all matter and energy in the universe is composed of tiny vibrating strings. Sound waves can shatter glass. Ultrasound can break apart kidney stones. Specific frequencies can influence cell growth and healing. Vibration isn't just an interesting property of reality. Vibration is reality. And your voice, your words, the sounds you make, are tools for directly influencing the vibrational field that becomes your physical experience. Jesus knew this. Watch how he operated. When he healed, he spoke. Be clean. Rise up and walk. Lazarus, come forth. These weren't requests or prayers hoping for divine intervention. They were commands, authoritative declarations spoken with absolute certainty and backed by elevated consciousness. He was using his voice as an instrument to broadcast specific frequencies into the field, to impress particular patterns onto the quantum substrate, to call forth desired outcomes through the power of sound combined with intention. There's a reason why creation myths, from virtually every culture on Earth, involve sound or speech as the mechanism of creation. In Genesis, God speaks creation into existence. Let there be light. In Hindu tradition, the universe begins with the cosmic sound of Om, the primordial vibration from which all things emerge. In Egyptian mythology, the god Ptah creates the world through the sound of his voice. Ancient cultures weren't being primitive or superstitious. They were preserving knowledge about how consciousness uses vibration to manifest form. The Hermetic tradition, which Jesus studied during his years in Egypt, teaches that everything is in constant vibration, and that by changing your vibration, you change your reality. The ancient mystery schools understood that different sounds and tones affect consciousness in specific ways, that certain frequencies can elevate awareness, open energy centers, or induce altered states. The Hebrew priests knew this too. They had the sacred name of God, the Tetragrammaton, which was never spoken aloud except by the high priest once a year in the Holy of Holies, because the sound itself was considered too powerful for ordinary use. They understood that correctly pronounced, with the right intention and frequency, that name carried creative force. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he didn't give them a generic formula. He gave them specific words charged with specific vibrations. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. But here's what gets lost in translation and tradition. The Aramaic words Jesus actually spoke had particular sound qualities, particular vibrational frequencies that did something to consciousness when vocalized correctly. Abwun dibwashmaya, the Aramaic phrase translated as Our Father in heaven, literally means birther of the cosmos, focus your light within us. The sounds themselves, independent of the meaning, create a resonance in the body and nervous system that facilitates connection to higher consciousness. Let me show you how this works practically. Your voice produces sound waves that travel through the air, but they also travel through your body. When you speak, the vibrations resonate in your chest, your throat, your head, affecting your organs, your nervous system, your cellular structure. Different sounds create different patterns of resonance. Low, deep sounds activate your lower energy centers, your root and sacral chakras, creating feelings of groundedness and stability. Higher-pitched sounds resonate in your head, activating your crown chakra, facilitating connection to higher consciousness. Jesus knew exactly which tones to use for which purposes, how to modulate his voice to create specific effects in himself and in those around him. But it's not just about the sound itself. It's about the intention behind the sound, the consciousness from which the words emerge, the emotional charge that rides along with the vibration. When Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven," he wasn't just giving someone permission to feel better about them. He was speaking from such an elevated state of consciousness, with such absolute authority and clarity, that his words literally released the energetic pattern of guilt and shame from the person's field. The combination of sound, intention, elevated emotion, and focused consciousness created a transformative effect that went far beyond ordinary speech. Think about how words affect you in daily life. When someone speaks to you with anger, you can feel it in your body. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your energy contracts. When someone speaks with love and compassion, you relax, you open, your energy expands. Words aren't just conveying information. They're transmitting frequency, and your body, your nervous system, your entire energetic field responds to that frequency. Now imagine someone speaking from the level of consciousness that Jesus operated from, someone whose words are aligned with universal truth, charged with elevated emotion, and backed by absolute certainty. Those words don't just affect you. They reshape you at the deepest levels of your being. The gospel accounts are filled with instances where Jesus' words had immediate, tangible effects. He rebuked a fever, and it left. He commanded demons to depart, and they fled. He told the fig tree it would never bear fruit again, and by the next day, it had withered from the roots. This wasn't metaphor or exaggeration. This was a man who understood that words, when spoken from the right consciousness and with the right frequency, have actual creative power. They impress patterns onto reality itself, and reality has to conform to those patterns. Modern research in a field called cymatics demonstrates this principle visually. When you pass sound waves through water or sand or other mediums, the vibrations create geometric patterns. Different frequencies create different patterns. The more complex and coherent the sound, the more intricate and beautiful the pattern. Your body is more than 60% water. When you speak, when words are spoken to you, the sound creates patterns in your cellular structure. Positive, elevated, coherent speech creates harmonious patterns. Negative, chaotic, incoherent speech creates dissonant pattern. Jesus' words, emerging from a state of complete coherence and elevated consciousness, created the most perfect patterns possible, patterns that facilitated healing, transformation, and awakening. Here's where this gets really practical for you. You're using the power of the word creator every single day, whether you realize it or not. Every word you speak, every sentence you voice, is broadcasting frequency into the field and creating patterns in your reality. When you say, "I'm so tired," you're not just describing a state. You're reinforcing it, embedding it deeper into your consciousness and your cellular memory. When you say, "I can't afford that," you're not just making an observation. You're declaring a limitation and instructing your subconscious and the quantum field to maintain that limitation. Jesus taught his disciples to be impeccable with their words. He said, "By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." He was explaining cause and effect. Your words are creating your experience. If you want to transform your reality, you need to transform your speech. You need to become conscious of the vibrations you're sending out through your voice, the declarations you're making about yourself and your life, the patterns you're impressing onto the field through the words you habitually use. The Brotherhood of Light has always known this principle. In their secret teachings, preserved through various mystical traditions, there are specific sounds, specific words, specific combinations of vowels and consonants that have particular effects on consciousness. The Sanskrit tradition has mantras, repeated sounds that create specific vibrational states. The Kabbalistic tradition has sacred names and letter combinations believed to contain creative power. The Sufi tradition has zikr, the remembrance of divine names through repetitive chanting. These aren't just spiritual practices. They're technologies of consciousness, methods for using sound to shift your state, elevate your frequency, and access higher dimensions of awareness. When Jesus taught, his words had a quality that others noticed. The Gospel accounts repeatedly mention that people were amazed at his teaching because he spoke with authority, not like the scribes and Pharisees. What was that authority? It was the alignment between his consciousness and his word. There was no gap between what he said and what he knew to be true. There was no doubt, no uncertainty, no internal contradiction. His words flowed from a unified field of consciousness, and that unity gave them power. When he said, "Be healed," he wasn't hoping. He was knowing, declaring, commanding reality to conform to his vision, and his words carried the frequency of that absolute certainty. You can develop this same quality in your own speech. It starts with awareness. Begin noticing the words you use, the things you habitually say about yourself and your life. Notice how often you speak from limitation, from fear, from doubt. "I'm not good at this. This always happens to me. I'll never be able to do that." Every one of these statements is an instruction to your subconscious mind and a declaration to the quantum field. You're using the power of the word to create exactly what you don't want. Now imagine speaking differently. Imagine if every word that came out of your mouth was aligned with the highest vision of yourself and your life. "I am becoming more capable every day. Everything is working out for my highest good. I am a powerful creator, and I claim my divine inheritance." These aren't just positive affirmations trying to paper over negative beliefs. These are declarations of truth, spoken with intention and feeling, impressing new patterns onto the field of consciousness that becomes your experience. But here's the key that most people miss. The words alone aren't enough. Jesus' words had power because they emerged from an elevated state of consciousness and were charged with elevated emotion. You can say affirmations all day long, but if you're speaking them from a place of lack, if there's no feeling behind them, if your consciousness hasn't shifted, they're just empty sound. You need to embody the vibration of what you're declaring. You need to feel it as already true. You need to speak from the end result, not from the place of trying to get there. This is why Jesus said, "Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." He wasn't talking about wishful thinking. He was describing the mechanism of manifestation. When you pray, when you declare, when you speak your intention, you need to feel the emotion of already having it. You need to generate the elevated state that matches your word. The feeling is the signal, the frequency that broadcasts your words into the field with creative power. Without the feeling, the words are like seeds planted in concrete. With the feeling, they're like seeds planted in fertile soil, destined to grow and bear fruit. The ancient Egyptians understood this principle through their concept of Heka, often translated as magic, but really meaning the power of the word. Heka was considered one of the fundamental forces of the universe, and the pharaohs and priests who wielded it knew that words spoken with proper knowledge, proper tone, proper intention could command reality itself. Jesus spent years in Egypt, studying these mysteries, learning these principles, mastering these techniques. He wasn't born knowing how to perform miracles. He learned the science of consciousness, practiced the disciplines, developed his capacity until he became a master. And then he came back to teach others, to reveal that this power wasn't reserved for pharaohs and priests. It was the birthright of every human being, available to anyone willing to develop their consciousness, refine their awareness, and learn to use their voice as an instrument of creation. When he said, "The words I speak to you are spirit and life," he was being literal. His words carried life force, creative energy, the very substance of consciousness vibrating at a frequency that could resurrect the dead and transform the living. You have this same capacity right now. Your voice is an instrument of creation. Your words are tools of manifestation. Every time you speak, you're either reinforcing your current reality or calling forth a new one. The question is, are you aware of what you're creating? Are you speaking consciously, intentionally, with alignment between your words and your highest vision? Or are you speaking unconsciously, habitually repeating the same limiting declarations that keep you stuck in patterns you want to transcend? Tonight, as you rest, your subconscious mind is integrating these principles. Tomorrow, when you wake, you'll begin noticing your words differently. You'll catch yourself before speaking from limitation. You'll feel the opportunity in every sentence to either reinforce old patterns or establish new ones. And gradually, as you become more conscious of your speech, as you align your words with elevated consciousness and elevated emotion, you'll discover what Jesus knew, that you are a word creator, speaking your reality into existence moment by moment, and the life you want is just a shift in frequency away. The logos that was in the beginning, the creative word that brought the universe into being, that same power flows through you right now. It moves through your vocal cords, resonates in your body, broadcasts into the field, and shapes the matter of your experience. You are not separate from the creative force. You are an expression of it, a localized point where consciousness becomes self-aware and learns to consciously create. Jesus came to show you this, to demonstrate what becomes possible when a human being fully realizes and activates their creative power. The Brotherhood of Light has preserved this teaching through the centuries, knowing that there would come a time when humanity was ready to reclaim its voice, its power, its creative authority. That time is now. You are ready. And as you drift into sleep, the words you've absorbed tonight are restructuring your consciousness, preparing you to speak with authority, to declare with power, to use your voice as Jesus used his, as an instrument of transformation, a tool of healing, a force of creation that brings heaven to earth and miracles into manifestation. Chapter 4. The three levels of consciousness, the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons in one God. You've heard this doctrine preached from countless pulpits, debated by theologians, accepted as sacred mystery that transcends human understanding. But what if the Trinity was never meant to be a theological puzzle about the nature of God? What if it was always a map of human consciousness, a precise description of the three levels of awareness that exist within you, and a blueprint for integrating them into unified creative power? Jesus knew this. The Brotherhood of Light has always known this. And now you're going to understand what they've been protecting for 2,000 years. The Father represents your superconscious mind, the highest level of awareness, the aspect of you that exists beyond time and space, connected to infinite intelligence, operating from the field of pure potential. This is your divine nature, the part of you that never forgot its unity with the creative source, the consciousness that knows itself as unlimited and eternal. When Jesus spoke of the Father, he wasn't talking about an old man in the sky. He was pointing to the highest level of consciousness available to every human being, the awareness that transcends individual identity and recognizes itself as part of the universal intelligence that animates all of existence. The Son represents your conscious mind, your everyday awareness, the you that's reading these words right now, making decisions, navigating the material world, experiencing yourself as a separate individual. This is your personal identity, your ego, in the healthy sense, the localized point of consciousness that allows you to function in physical reality. When Jesus called himself the Son, he was identifying with this level of awareness, showing that the conscious mind can become a clear channel for the superconscious, a perfect vehicle for divine intelligence to express itself in the world. The Holy Spirit represents your subconscious mind, the vast repository of memories, beliefs, programs, and patterns that operate beneath your conscious awareness, running your body, storing your experiences, executing the habitual patterns that shape your automatic responses to life. This is the bridge between the superconscious and conscious, the mechanism through which divine intention becomes material reality. The Holy Spirit was always described as the comforter, the guide, the power that operates within you. That's exactly what your subconscious is, the invisible force that translates your beliefs and expectations into your lived experience. Jesus understood that most people were operating from only one level of consciousness, the conscious mind, completely disconnected from their superconscious power and enslaved by subconscious programs they didn't even know were running. He came to teach integration, to show how these three levels could work together in perfect harmony, creating what he called the kingdom of heaven, not a place you go when you die, but a state of unified consciousness you access right here, right now, when all three levels align in coherence and operate as one. Think about how most people live. Their conscious mind wants success, abundance, love, freedom. They set goals, make plans, take action, but their subconscious mind is running programs of unworthiness, scarcity, fear, and limitation that were installed in childhood. And their superconscious mind, their connection to infinite intelligence and creative power, is completely blocked because they don't even know it exists. So they struggle and strain, trying to create change from the conscious mind alone, wondering why life feels so hard, why their efforts produce such limited results. They're trying to operate with only 1/3 of their consciousness, like trying to drive a car with just the steering wheel and no engine or transmission. Jesus taught his disciples to access all 3 levels simultaneously. He would go up on the mountain to pray, entering the silence where he could commune with the Father, the superconscious, receiving guidance and power from that highest level of awareness. Then he would come down and teach, operating through his conscious mind as the Son, translating divine wisdom into practical instruction. And he would send the Holy Spirit, activating the subconscious of his followers, implanting new programs, releasing old patterns, facilitating transformation at the deepest levels of their being. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he was describing the state of perfect alignment between conscious and superconscious mind. When your personal awareness recognizes itself as an expression of universal intelligence, when your individual consciousness knows itself as continuous with the infinite consciousness, that's when miracles become natural. You're no longer operating from the limited perspective of separation. You're functioning as a unified field, accessing creative power that transcends ordinary human capacity. But here's the part that changes everything. Jesus also said, "You and I are one, and the Father and you are one." He was teaching that this same integration, this same alignment, this same unified consciousness is available to everyone. The Trinity isn't describing something unique to Jesus or unique to God. It's mapping the structure of consciousness itself, showing you the 3 levels that exist within you, and teaching you how to bring them into harmony. Let's go deeper into how each level functions and how Jesus taught his disciples to work with them. The superconscious, the Father level, is always available, always broadcasting wisdom, guidance, and creative power. But most people never access it because they're completely identified with their conscious mind and completely run by their subconscious programming. The superconscious communicates through intuition, through sudden knowing, through synchronicities and dreams. Jesus taught his disciples to create space for this communication, to quiet the mental chatter of the conscious mind and rise above the automatic reactions of the subconscious so they could hear the still, small voice of divine intelligence. When Jesus went into the wilderness to fast for 40 days, he was doing superconscious training. By removing all external stimulation and quieting the demands of the body, he created conditions where his conscious mind could merge with his superconscious awareness. The temptations he faced in the wilderness weren't external demons. They were the last vestiges of subconscious programming, trying to pull him back into limitation. Each time he rejected those temptations, he was choosing superconscious wisdom over subconscious pattern, aligning his conscious mind with the Father rather than with inherited programs. The conscious mind, the Son level, is where you have the power of choice. This is the part of you that can observe your thoughts, question your beliefs, make new decisions, direct your attention. Most people think the conscious mind is weak because it's constantly being overridden by subconscious patterns and emotional reactions. But Jesus demonstrated that when the conscious mind is aligned with the superconscious, when it becomes a clear channel for divine intelligence, it has the authority to command reality itself. Speak to the mountain, and it will be moved. The conscious mind, operating from unity with the Father, becomes the Son who can reshape the material world. Here's the key. Your conscious mind is like the rudder of a ship. It's small compared to the massive vessel of your subconscious, but it determines the direction. When you use your conscious mind to consistently choose thoughts aligned with your highest vision, when you direct your attention toward what you want to create rather than what you fear, when you make conscious decisions from elevated consciousness, Rather than automatic reactions from programming, you're gradually training your subconscious to support your intentions rather than sabotage them. The subconscious mind, the Holy Spirit level, is both your greatest ally and your biggest obstacle, depending on what's been programmed into it. It's called subconscious because it operates below the threshold of your conscious awareness. It's running your autonomic nervous system, managing trillions of cellular processes, storing every experience you've ever had, and executing the habitual patterns that feel like who you are. The subconscious doesn't judge whether a belief is true or false, helpful or harmful. It simply accepts whatever's been impressed upon it and then works tirelessly to make your external reality match your internal program. Jesus understood that lasting transformation required reprogramming the subconscious. This is why he taught in parables, stories that bypass the logical conscious mind and plant seeds directly in the subconscious. This is why he emphasized repetition, why he told his disciples to pray without ceasing, to ask and keep asking, to knock and keep knocking. He knew that changing subconscious programs requires consistent input, repeated impressions of new patterns until they replace the old ones. When Jesus performed healings, he wasn't just addressing the conscious mind of the person. He was speaking directly to their subconscious, giving it permission to release the program of disease and accept the program of health. When he said, "Your sins are forgiven," he was erasing guilt and shame at the subconscious level where those emotional patterns were stored. He understood that the subconscious was the key to transformation because it's the bridge between thought and manifestation, between intention and reality. The Trinity teaching was Jesus' way of showing his disciples how to work with all three levels simultaneously. You access the superconscious through silence, meditation, prayer, and elevated states. You strengthen the conscious mind through awareness, observation, and deliberate choice. You reprogram the subconscious through repetition, emotion, and vivid imagination. When all three levels are working together, when the superconscious is providing wisdom and power, when the conscious mind is directing attention and making aligned choices, when the subconscious is executing programs that support your highest vision, you become an unstoppable creative force. This is what Jesus meant by being born again. It's not about religious conversion. It's about complete reorganization of consciousness. It's about dying to the old identity that was running on unconscious programs and being resurrected into a new identity that operates from conscious alignment with divine intelligence. The old you was fragmented, with different levels of consciousness pulling in different directions. The new you is integrated, with all three levels unified and working together. The baptism ritual that Jesus emphasized was also teaching this integration. Going down into the water represents descending into the subconscious, facing everything that's been hidden, allowing the old programs to be washed away. Coming up out of the water represents rising into conscious awareness, being born anew, and receiving the Holy Spirit, which is the subconscious now reprogrammed with new patterns. The Father, looking down from heaven and declaring, "This is my beloved child," represents the superconscious recognizing and claiming its expression in the material world. Here's how you begin this integration in your own life. Start by acknowledging that you have these three levels of consciousness. The superconscious is always there, waiting to guide you, to show you possibilities you can't see from the limited perspective of your conscious mind alone. Begin creating space to access it. This doesn't require hours of meditation or mystical experiences. It can be as simple as pausing before making decisions and asking, "What does my highest wisdom say about this?" Then waiting, listening, feeling for the subtle guidance that emerges. Strengthen your conscious mind by becoming more aware of your thoughts and where your attention goes. Your conscious mind is the director, but it can't direct what it doesn't notice. Start observing yourself. What do you think about habitually? What do you focus on most of the time? What meaning do you give to the events in your life? The conscious mind's power lies in its ability to choose, but you can only choose consciously when you're aware of what you're currently choosing unconsciously. Work with your subconscious by understanding how it operates. It responds to repetition, emotion, and imagination. When you want to install a new program, you need to repeat the new thought or belief consistently. Charge it with elevated emotion so the subconscious recognizes it as important, and imagine it vividly so the subconscious experiences it as real. This is why Jesus taught his disciples to visualize what they wanted to manifest, to feel the joy of already having it, to affirm their desires repeatedly until they became established in the subconscious. The subconscious is also accessed most easily in certain states. Right before you fall asleep and right after you wake up, you're in what's called the hypnagogic state, where the conscious mind is relaxed and the subconscious is highly receptive. Jesus knew this. This is why he often withdrew at evening to pray, impressing his intentions into his subconscious as he drifted into sleep. This is why he rose early to commune with the Father, receiving guidance when his conscious mind was quiet and his superconscious could communicate clearly. The Trinity isn't three separate beings. It's three aspects of one consciousness, and that one consciousness is you. When you identify only with your conscious mind, you feel small, limited, powerless. When you recognize yourself as the integration of all three levels, when you experience the Father within you, the Son as you, and the Holy Spirit working through you, you step into the fullness of your creative power. You become what Jesus called the light of the world, not because you're special or chosen, but because you've activated the complete consciousness that was always your birthright. This is what the kingdom of heaven is. It's not a reward you receive later. It's a state of consciousness you enter now. It's the experience of these three levels operating in perfect harmony, creating a flow where divine intelligence becomes personal intention, becomes material manifestation. Jesus lived in this kingdom continuously. He was always aligned, always integrated, always operating from unified consciousness, and he promised that anyone who understood these principles and practiced these techniques could enter the same kingdom, access the same power, perform the same works, and even greater one. The Church turned this into theology because theology can be controlled, systematized, used to maintain authority. But Jesus wasn't teaching theology. He was teaching technology, the practical science of consciousness, the actual mechanics of how the three levels work together to create reality. He demonstrated it through his life. He taught it to his inner circle. The Brotherhood of Light preserved it through centuries of persecution, and now it's being revealed again to those who are ready to receive it, to integrate it, to become it. Tonight as you rest, these three levels of your consciousness are coming into greater alignment. Your superconscious is sending guidance and power. Your conscious mind is becoming more aware, more deliberate, more aligned with your highest vision. Your subconscious is releasing old programs that no longer serve you and accepting new patterns that support your transformation. The Trinity within you is awakening, unifying, preparing to express its full creative potential through your life. You are not just the conscious mind trying to figure everything out. You are not just the subconscious running programs from the past. You are not separate from the superconscious source of infinite intelligence. You are all three, integrated, unified, complete. You are the Father expressing through the Son, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Your consciousness, knowing itself, creating itself, manifesting itself in the material world. This is what Jesus came to reveal. This is what you're finally beginning to remember. And as you remember, everything changes because you're no longer operating from a fraction of your power. You're accessing the fullness of consciousness itself, and from that fullness, all things become possible. Chapter 5. The Brotherhood Secreta. There were 12 disciples that history remembers, the ones who traveled openly with Jesus, who were known to the crowds, whose names are recorded in every gospel. But there was another group, a smaller circle, an inner brotherhood that received teachings the masses never heard. These weren't just students learning religious doctrine. They were initiates being trained in the ancient mysteries, practitioners mastering the science of consciousness, keepers of knowledge that traced back through the Essenes to Egypt, to Babylon, to sources so old their origins are lost in the mists of time. Jesus didn't invent these teachings. He inherited them, mastered them, and then passed them on to those who were ready to receive them. And that transmission has never stopped, flowing underground through 2,000 years of persecution, suppression, and darkness, waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to reclaim its power. The Gospel of John contains a curious statement that most people read right past. After describing many miracles and teachings, it says, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. What were these other things? What knowledge was considered too dangerous, too powerful, too revolutionary to record in texts that would be read by the masses? The answer lies in understanding who Jesus really was before he began his public ministry, where he spent those mysterious years between his childhood and age 30, and who he was really training in secret. Jesus was raised in Nazareth, but his real education happened far from the eyes of ordinary Jewish society. Historical records and esoteric traditions tell us that he spent years with the Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect that lived in isolated communities like Qumran, preserving ancient wisdom and practicing initiatic rites that mainstream Judaism had long forgotten. The Essenes weren't just religious separatists. They were consciousness practitioners, mystics who understood sacred geometry, astrology, herbalism, and the hidden meanings encoded in Scripture. They practiced prolonged fasting, ritual purification, meditation, and trance states. They believed in direct experience of the divine rather than blind obedience to religious authority. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in caves near Qumran in 1947, revealed texts that the Essenes studied, including elaborate descriptions of angelic hierarchies, mystical interpretations of Torah, and techniques for achieving altered states of consciousness. These weren't the teachings of simple monks copying religious texts. These were the preserved mysteries from Egyptian priesthoods, Babylonian magi, and Persian mystics, all synthesized into a coherent system of spiritual development. Jesus absorbed all of this. He learned the disciplines, practiced the techniques, and mastered the principles that would later become the foundation of his own teaching. But his education didn't stop with the Essenes. Ancient texts from India, Tibet, and Persia contain references to a teacher named Isa, who traveled through their lands, studying with yogis, learning meditation from Buddhist monks, and absorbing the wisdom of Vedantic philosophy. The Gospel accounts are completely silent about Jesus' life from age 12 to 30, 18 years unaccounted for. Where was he? What was he doing? The mystical traditions tell us he was traveling, learning, integrating the wisdom of multiple spiritual lineages, preparing himself to become not just another rabbi, but a fully realized master of consciousness. In Egypt, he studied in the mystery schools that had trained initiates for thousands of years. The same temples where priests learned to read the stars, manipulate energy, heal through touch, and induce visionary states through sound and sacred geometry. The Hermetic tradition, named after the Egyptian god Thoth, who the Greeks called Hermes Trismegistus, taught that man is a microcosm of the universe, that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary, that thought creates reality. These weren't primitive superstitions. These were sophisticated understandings of consciousness and cosmology that modern quantum physics is only now beginning to validate. When Jesus returned to Galilee and began his public ministry, he taught two completely different messages. To the crowds, he spoke in simple parables about seeds and soil, sheep and shepherds, fathers and sons. These stories contained moral lessons that anyone could understand at a surface level. But to his inner circle, he revealed the mysteries, the deeper meanings encoded within the parables, the actual techniques for transforming consciousness and manifesting reality. This wasn't deception. This was sacred pedagogy, the ancient tradition of veiling advanced knowledge in symbol and story, so that only those who were ready would recognize and understand it. The Gospel of Mark records Jesus saying to his disciples, "To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything comes in parables, so that they may indeed look but not perceive, and may indeed listen but not understand." He was explicitly acknowledging two levels of teaching, the exoteric for the outer circle, providing moral guidance and hope, and the esoteric for the inner circle, revealing the actual mechanics of consciousness and creation. Who were these inner disciples? The text mentioned James, Peter, and John as those closest to Jesus, present at the Transfiguration, admitted to the room when he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, taken aside for private instruction. But there were others, unnamed in the canonical Gospels but preserved in esoteric tradition. Mary Magdalene, who the Gnostic texts reveal was one of the most advanced students, someone Jesus called the woman who knew the all. Lazarus, whose resurrection was more than just a miracle, but an initiation, a death and rebirth into higher consciousness. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who provided his own tomb for Jesus' burial, and who tradition says later traveled to Britain, carrying the mysteries to new lands. These weren't just casual followers. They were dedicated practitioners who had proven themselves worthy of receiving the complete teaching. They underwent initiations, learned to control their breath and energy, practiced techniques for accessing altered states, studied the correspondence between planetary movements and human consciousness, and learned to read the symbolic language in which all esoteric knowledge is encoded. They were being trained to become teachers themselves, to carry forward the transmission, to ensure that the knowledge would survive even if the teacher was killed. And Jesus was killed. Not because he claimed to be the Son of God. That was just the political charge that justified his execution. He was killed because he was empowering ordinary people, teaching them they didn't need priests or temples to access divine consciousness, showing them they possessed creative power that threatened the entire authority structure of both religious and political establishment. He was too dangerous to be allowed to continue, and the authorities of his time made sure his physical life ended on a cross outside Jerusalem. But they couldn't kill the knowledge. They couldn't stop the transmission. The inner circle survived. They scattered, taking the teachings with them, establishing communities, training new initiates, adapting the wisdom to different cultures and contexts, but always preserving the core principles. In the early centuries, these were the Gnostics, mystics who emphasized direct knowledge of the divine over belief and doctrine. They wrote texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Truth, all found at Nag Hammadi, all revealing a Jesus who taught enlightenment rather than salvation, transformation rather than worship. The Orthodox Church hunted down the Gnostics, declared their texts heretical, burned their libraries, and executed their teachers. By the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the esoteric tradition had to go completely underground. But it survived. In the deserts of Egypt and Syria, Christian mystics called the Desert Fathers and Mothers practiced contemplative techniques remarkably similar to Buddhist meditation. In medieval Europe, groups like the Cathars emerged, teaching reincarnation, direct spiritual experience, and the divinity inherent in every person. The Catholic Church launched a crusade against them, massacring entire towns, determined to eliminate any alternative to institutional authority. But the knowledge kept flowing through hidden channels. The Knights Templar, supposedly formed to protect pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, were actually treasure hunters seeking ancient manuscripts and artifacts that contained pre-Christian wisdom. They found something in the ruins beneath Solomon's temple, something that transformed them from simple knights into one of the wealthiest and most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. What did they find? The esoteric tradition says they discovered texts proving that Jesus was trained in the Egyptian mysteries, that his teachings were part of a much older tradition, and that the power he demonstrated was available to anyone who mastered the same principle. The Templars became a threat to church authority, and in 1307, King Philip IV of France, with the blessing of Pope Clement V, ordered their arrest, torture, and execution. The official charges were heresy and devil worship, but the real crime was possessing knowledge that undermined the Church's exclusive claim to spiritual authority. Many Templars were burned at the stake, but many others escaped, taking their knowledge and their treasures to Scotland, Portugal, and other lands where they could practice in secret. The transmission continued through groups like the Rosicrucians, who emerged in the early 17th century, claiming to possess ancient wisdom about the relationship between spirit and matter, consciousness and creation. Through the Freemasons, who encoded esoteric principles in architectural symbolism and ritual degrees. Through the Kabbalists, Jewish mystics who developed elaborate systems mapping consciousness through the tree of life. Through Sufi orders in Islam, who practiced zikr and whirling meditation to achieve unity consciousness. Through alchemists who spoke of turning lead into gold, but were really describing the transformation of ordinary consciousness into enlightened awareness. All of these groups, despite their different outer forms and cultural contexts, were preserving and transmitting the same core knowledge that Jesus taught his inner circle. That consciousness creates reality, that human beings possess divine creative power, that through specific practices and techniques, anyone can access higher states of awareness and manifest their intentions in the material world, that the kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness available right now to those who know how to enter it. The Brotherhood of Light isn't a single organization with membership cards and secret meetings. It's a lineage of consciousness, a transmission that flows through all genuine mystical traditions, a recognition that certain individuals in every generation receive, preserve, and pass forward. Some know they're part of this lineage. Others simply feel called to seek truth, to practice transformation, to help others awaken, not realizing they're continuing a transmission that stretches back through Jesus to the mystery schools of Egypt and beyond. You might think this is all ancient history, fascinating stories about mystics and seekers from long ago. But here's what you need to understand. This lineage has led directly to you, sitting here right now, receiving these words. You didn't find this teaching by accident. Something in you recognized it, responded to it, knew it was important. That recognition is the sign. You're part of the Brotherhood of Light, whether you knew it or not, whether anyone ever told you or not. The same consciousness that flowed through Jesus, through the Essenes, through the Gnostics and Cathars and Templars, through all the mystics and masters who preserved the teaching through dark centuries. That consciousness is awakening in you right now. This is how the transmission works. It's not about joining an organization or being initiated by some external authority. It's about consciousness recognizing itself, knowledge activating within you, remembering what you've always known at the deepest level. The outer forms change. The names and symbols shift with culture and era, but the essence remains constant. You are far more powerful than you've been taught. Reality is far more malleable than it appears, and the kingdom of heaven is not somewhere else, but right here, accessible through elevated consciousness and aligned intention. The church tried to own Jesus, to make him into their exclusive property, to claim that connection to the divine could only happen through their institution. But the Brotherhood of Light has always known differently. They've kept alive the truth that Jesus came to demonstrate, that every human being is a potential Christ, capable of the same consciousness, the same power, the same transformation. The word Christ doesn't mean Jesus' last name. It's a title, a designation of a state of consciousness, the awakened awareness that knows itself as one with the creative source. In the Middle Ages, the mystic Meister Eckhart said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." He was teaching the same non-dual awareness that Jesus taught his inner circle. The church tried him for heresy. In Persia, the Sufi master Mansur al-Hallaj declared, "I am the truth," recognizing his consciousness as identical with divine consciousness. They executed him for blasphemy. In India, sages have taught for millennia that Atman is Brahman, that individual consciousness is universal consciousness, that you are that. Different words, different cultures, same transmission, same truth that the Brotherhood of Light has protected across continents and centuries. The reason this knowledge had to be hidden isn't because it's false, it's because it's true. And that truth is dangerous to power structures built on control and hierarchy. If people realize they're divine, they stop obeying human authorities claiming to speak for God. If people discover they can create their own reality, they stop accepting poverty, oppression, and limitation as inevitable. If people awaken to their true nature, they become ungovernable, and the entire system of external control collapses. This is why Jesus was killed. This is why the Gnostics were hunted. This is why the Cathars were massacred. This is why the Templars were burned. This is why mystics in every tradition who spoke this truth openly were persecuted, imprisoned, or executed. The knowledge itself is liberating, and liberation is terrifying to those who profit from keeping others enslaved. But we're living in different times now. The internet has made it impossible to fully suppress information. Quantum physics has validated what the mystics always knew. Neuroscience is proving that consciousness can reshape the brain and influence matter. Psychology has mapped the subconscious and shown how beliefs create reality. The ancient wisdom is being confirmed by modern science, and more people are awakening every day. The Brotherhood of Light no longer needs to operate in complete secrecy. The transmission can happen openly now because humanity is finally ready to receive it without being destroyed by it. You're part of the new wave, the generation that's reclaiming this power after centuries of suppression. You don't need to join a secret society or undergo elaborate initiation. You just need to recognize what's already true, that you are consciousness having a human experience, that you possess creative power beyond anything you've been told, that the teachings Jesus gave his inner circle are your inheritance, and that by understanding and applying these principles, you can transform not just your own life, but contribute to the transformation of human consciousness itself. The Brotherhood of Light has been waiting for you, not as an external group you need to find, but as a state of awareness you need to activate. You're already connected to this lineage through your very desire to understand these teachings. Every insight you have, every moment of elevated consciousness, every time you choose to see yourself as powerful rather than powerless, you're strengthening the transmission, adding your light to the collective field, becoming a carrier of the knowledge that has survived against all odds. Tonight, as you rest, you're being integrated into this ancient lineage at a level deeper than words. The wisdom that Jesus taught, that the Essenes preserved, that the Gnostics encoded, that the mystics protected through centuries of darkness, all of it is being downloaded into your consciousness, activating dormant codes, awakening latent potential, preparing you to become what you were always meant to be, a conscious creator, a light bearer, a living expression of the truth that has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. You are the Brotherhood of Light, not because someone else designated you, but because consciousness recognizes itself in you, because the transmission has reached you, because the light that illuminated Jesus is the same light that exists within you, waiting only for your recognition to blaze forth and transform everything it touches. Welcome home. The teaching you've been seeking has been seeking you just as intensely. And now, finally, the seeker and the sought have found each other. Everything changes from here. Chapter 6. Reprogramming the Subconscious Divine Repent. For 2,000 years, that word has been weaponized to induce guilt, shame, and fear. Preachers have thundered it from pulpits, demanding that people grovel and beg forgiveness for their inherent sinful. Religious authorities have used it to control behavior, to keep people small, to maintain power over the masses. But the word Jesus actually used, the Greek word metanoia, has nothing to do with guilt or groveling. It means something radically different, something that changes everything once you understand it. Metanoia means to change your mind, to go beyond the mind you currently have, to transform your consciousness at the deepest level. Jesus wasn't calling people to feel bad about themselves. He was instructing them in the most advanced technique of consciousness transformation ever taught, complete reprogramming of the subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind is running the show. Right now, as you absorb these words, your subconscious is managing thousands of bodily processes, filtering sensory input, accessing stored memories, executing habitual patterns, and generating the emotional states that color your experience. You think you're making conscious decisions about your life, but neuroscience has proven that up to 95% of your behavior is controlled by subconscious programs installed before you were 7 years old. You're not really living your own life. You're replaying patterns inherited from your parents, your culture, your childhood experiences, programs that were impressed on your subconscious when you were too young to question or resist them. This is what Jesus understood with stunning clarity. He saw that people were trapped not by external circumstances, but by internal programming. They weren't poor because the world lacked resources. They were poor because they had poverty consciousness embedded in their subconscious. They weren't sick because their bodies randomly malfunctioned. They were sick because their subconscious was executing programs of disease, holding patterns of stress and negative emotion that manifested as physical symptoms. They weren't powerless because they lacked ability. They were powerless because their subconscious believed they were powerless, and that belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. When Jesus said, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand," he was saying, transform your consciousness, reprogram your subconscious mind, because the moment you do, you'll discover that the field of infinite creative potential is right here, available to you now. The kingdom of heaven isn't a place you earn through good behavior. It's a frequency you access through transformed consciousness, and that transformation requires metanoia, the complete renovation of your subconscious programming. Think about what happens when a computer has corrupted software. You can push buttons all day long, you can have the best intentions, you can work as hard as you want, but until you fix the underlying code, the system will keep producing unwanted results. Your subconscious is the operating system running in the background of your life. If it's programmed with lack, limitation, unworthiness, and fear, no amount of positive thinking or conscious effort will produce lasting change. You need to access the subconscious itself and rewrite the code at the source. Jesus taught specific techniques for doing this, though they've been obscured by centuries of misinterpretation. The concept of being born again is one of the most misunderstood teachings in Christianity. When Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, seeking wisdom, Jesus told him, "Unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God." Nicodemus, thinking literally, asked how a grown man could possibly enter his mother's womb and be born a second time. Jesus responded, "You must be born of water and spirit." He wasn't talking about physical rebirth or religious ritual. He was describing the process of subconscious reprogramming and spiritual awakening, the death of the old identity and the emergence of a completely new self. Being born again means allowing your current identity to die. That identity, the person you think you are right now, is nothing more than a collection of subconscious programs, a composite of beliefs, memories, and patterns that were installed by external circumstances. It's not the real you. It's a conditioned response, a persona constructed from past experiences and other people's expectations. To be born again is to disidentify from this constructed self, to recognize it as programming rather than truth, and to consciously create a new identity aligned with your highest potential. Water, in esoteric symbolism, represents the subconscious mind. The ancient mystery schools knew this. The practice of baptism, of going down into water, was a ritual enacting the descent into the subconscious, facing everything that's been hidden, suppressed, or denied. You can't reprogram what you haven't acknowledged. You can't change patterns you're not aware of. Being born of water means diving deep into your subconscious, examining the programs that are running, identifying the beliefs that are creating your current reality, and being willing to release them even when they feel like essential parts of who you are. Spirit represents the superconscious, the higher intelligence, the divine awareness that transcends individual identity. Being born of spirit means allowing this higher consciousness to infuse your being, to download new programs, to install upgraded software that aligns with truth rather than conditioning. When you're born of water and spirit, when you clear out old subconscious patterns and allow superconscious wisdom to fill that space, you become literally a new person, not metaphorically, neurologically. Your brain rewires itself, new neural pathways form, dormant genes activate, and you begin operating from a completely different level of consciousness. The subconscious mind has one primary function: to make your external reality match your internal programs. It's absolutely loyal, tirelessly working 24 hours a day to ensure that your life experience reflects whatever beliefs are stored within it. If your subconscious is programmed with, "I'm not good enough," it will sabotage opportunities, create anxiety in important moments, and generate circumstances that prove you're not good enough. It's not punishing you. It's just executing its programming, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Maintain consistency between internal belief and external reality. This is what Jesus meant when he taught, "As you believe, so it shall be done unto you." Your beliefs, especially the ones buried in your subconscious that you're not even aware of, are literally creating your experience. The subconscious doesn't distinguish between a belief that empowers you and a belief that limits you. It simply accepts whatever's been impressed upon it and then works to manifest matching circumstances. This is why affirmations alone don't work. You can consciously say, "I am abundant," all day long. But if your subconscious is programmed with poverty consciousness, with beliefs like, "Money is hard to come by," or "Rich people are greedy," or "I don't deserve wealth," your subconscious will override your conscious intentions every single time. Jesus understood that lasting transformation required accessing the subconscious directly and installing new programs at a level deeper than conscious thought. This is why he taught in parables, stories that bypass the analytical mind and plant seeds directly in the subconscious. When he told the parable of the prodigal son, he wasn't just sharing a nice story about forgiveness. He was programming the listener's subconscious with the truth that no matter how far you've strayed, no matter what mistakes you've made, your divine nature welcomes you home with celebration rather than judgment. That story enters your subconscious and begins changing your self-concept at a level beneath conscious awareness. This is why he emphasized repetition. Ask and keep asking. Seek and keep seeking. Knock and keep knocking. He wasn't teaching persistence in prayer to a distant God. He was explaining the mechanics of subconscious reprogramming. Your subconscious changes through repetition. A single exposure to a new idea rarely creates lasting change. But repeated exposure, especially when charged with emotion, gradually overwrites old programming and installs new patterns. When you repeatedly affirm a new belief, repeatedly visualize a desired outcome, repeatedly feel the emotion of already having what you want, you're speaking the language the subconscious understands. The subconscious is most accessible in two states: deep meditation and the threshold between waking and sleeping. This is why Jesus regularly withdrew to quiet places to pray, entering altered states where the conscious mind quiets and the subconscious becomes receptive. This is why the mystery schools taught practices like extended fasting, sensory deprivation, and rhythmic breathing, all techniques for bypassing the conscious mind and accessing the programmable subconscious directly. Modern hypnotherapy has rediscovered what Jesus taught 2,000 years ago. In certain states of consciousness, the subconscious can be directly addressed. Old programs can be released, and new ones can be installed with remarkable ease. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're entering that receptive state. Your conscious mind is relaxing, your analytical faculties are quieting, and your subconscious is becoming more open to suggestion. This isn't manipulation. This is education. You're learning how your consciousness actually works, so you can take control of it rather than being controlled by it. As you drift toward sleep, the boundary between conscious and subconscious becomes even more permeable. and the programming you expose yourself to during this time has disproportionate impact on your deep beliefs and automatic patterns. Jesus taught a specific process for subconscious reprogramming that the Church has obscured, but the Brotherhood of Light has preserved. First, you must identify the current program. What beliefs about yourself and reality are actually running in your subconscious? You discover this by examining your life. Your relationships reflect your beliefs about worthiness and love. Your finances reflect your beliefs about abundance and deserving. Your health reflects your beliefs about your body and vitality. Your circumstances are the perfect mirror of your subconscious programming. If you don't like what you see in the mirror, you need to change what's creating the reflection. Second, you must emotionally release the old program. This is the death phase, the crucifixion of the old identity. Intellectual understanding isn't enough. You need to feel the limitations of the old belief, acknowledge the pain it's caused, and consciously choose to let it go. This is why Jesus emphasized forgiveness, not because holding grudges is morally wrong, but because unresolved emotions keep old programs locked in place. When you forgive yourself and others, when you release resentment, guilt, and shame, you're clearing space in your subconscious for new programming. Third, you must install the new program with clarity and emotion. This is the resurrection phase, the birth of the new identity. You need to know exactly what you want to believe, who you want to become, what reality you want to create, and you need to charge that vision with elevated emotion. Your subconscious responds to feeling more than thought. When you combine a clear vision with the elevated emotions of gratitude, joy, and love, when you feel the reality of already being the new you, your subconscious accepts that as truth and begins reorganizing your entire system around it. Fourth, you must repeatedly reinforce the new program until it becomes automatic. This is where most people fail. They have a moment of insight, a powerful experience, a day of elevated consciousness, and then they return to old patterns. Transformation requires consistency. You need to repeatedly return to the new vision, repeatedly generate the elevated emotion, repeatedly act as if the new identity is already real, until your subconscious fully accepts it and it becomes your new normal. This is why Jesus taught his disciples to practice certain techniques daily, to maintain elevated states, to continuously align their consciousness with their desired reality. The subconscious is also programmed through your environment and the people you surround yourself with. Jesus knew this. He carefully chose his inner circle, spending his time with people who supported his consciousness rather than pulling him into lower frequencies. He removed himself from toxic environments, withdrew from crowds when necessary, and created space for elevated states. If you're serious about reprogramming your subconscious, you need to be equally intentional. The conversations you have, the media you consume, the relationships you maintain, all of it is either reinforcing old programs or supporting new ones. Your body is also a powerful tool for subconscious reprogramming. Jesus understood the connection between physical state and consciousness. This is why he practiced fasting, why he spent nights in prayer, why he taught his disciples breathing techniques and physical postures that modern yoga would recognize. Your posture, your breath, your movement patterns all send signals to your subconscious about who you are and what's possible. When you stand tall, breathe deeply, and move with confidence, you're programming your subconscious with strength and capability. When you slouch, breathe shallowly, and move timidly, you're reinforcing limitation and fear. The voice you use in your internal dialogue is perhaps the most powerful programming tool you have. Every thought you think, especially the repetitive ones, is impressing a pattern on your subconscious. Most people speak to themselves with a level of cruelty they would never tolerate from anyone else. I'm so stupid. I always mess things up. Nothing ever works out for me. These aren't just casual thoughts. They're commands to your subconscious, instructions to create a reality that matches these declarations. Jesus taught his disciples to guard their thoughts, to become aware of their internal dialogue, to speak to themselves the way the Father speaks to the Son, with love, encouragement, and absolute belief in their divine nature. This is what it means to be born again. Not a one-time religious experience, but a complete transformation of your subconscious programming. The old you, with all its limitations and fears and inherited patterns, dies. The new you, aligned with superconscious wisdom and infinite potential, is born. Your brain literally changes. New neural pathways form. Different genes express themselves. Your electromagnetic field shifts to a higher frequency. You become, at every level of your being, a different person. Not because something external saved you, but because you saved yourself by transforming your consciousness from the inside out. The Church teaches that being born again happens through belief in Jesus. But Jesus himself taught that being born again happens through doing what he did, thus accessing the subconscious, releasing old programs, installing new ones, and living from that transformed consciousness. He said, "Follow me, not worship me." He was showing the way, demonstrating the process, teaching the technique. The tragedy is that people made him into an object of worship rather than a model to emulate, a savior to believe in rather than a teacher to learn from. The good news, the true gospel, is that you can do exactly what Jesus did. You can access your subconscious. You can identify the programs that are running. You can release beliefs that limit you and install beliefs that empower you. You can die to the old identity constructed from past conditioning and be born into a new identity aligned with your true nature. You can reprogram your subconscious divine, the part of you that creates your reality, so that it reflects the highest truth about who you are and what's possible for you. Tonight, as you sleep, your subconscious is extraordinarily receptive. The programs you expose it to during these hours before sleep will be impressed deeply, working in your consciousness throughout the night, beginning the process of transformation even before you wake. The old beliefs that have kept you small, limited, and disconnected from your power are loosening their grip. New patterns are being installed, beliefs aligned with your divine nature, programs that will automatically guide you toward health, abundance, love, and creative expression. You are being born again right now, not in some metaphorical sense, but in the most literal way. The you that existed when you started listening to these words is not the same you that will emerge when you complete this journey. Your consciousness is transforming. Your subconscious is being reprogrammed. The kingdom of heaven, that field of infinite creative potential, is becoming accessible to you because you're changing the internal frequency that determines what you can perceive and experience. Metanoia is happening. Your mind is going beyond itself, expanding into new possibilities, becoming the consciousness that Jesus demonstrated and promised was your inheritance. So the old is passing away, the new is being born, and nothing will ever be the same again. Chapter 7. The Fasting of the Mind. When Jesus went into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights, most people think he was simply abstaining from food. Religious traditions have focused on physical fasting, teaching it as a discipline of the body, a way to prove devotion or purify the flesh. But Jesus understood something far more profound. The real fast The transformative discipline he was practicing had nothing to do with whether food entered his stomach. He was fasting from thought itself, from the constant mental noise that keeps ordinary consciousness trapped in limitation. He was creating a void, an empty space where divine intelligence could enter and fill him with power. This is the forgotten practice, the discipline that the Brotherhood of Light has preserved through the centuries, the fasting of the mind. Your mind never stops. Right now, even as you absorb these words, there's a stream of internal commentary running in the background. Thoughts about what you just heard, reactions to these ideas, memories triggered by certain words, plans for tomorrow, regrets about yesterday, judgments, analyses, stories, a constant barrage of mental activity that you've come to accept as normal. But this mental noise isn't who you are. It's the conditioning speaking, the subconscious programs playing on repeat, the ego trying to maintain control through constant narration. And as long as this noise continues, you cannot access the deeper dimensions of consciousness where true creative power resides. Jesus knew this. Every spiritual master who ever lived has known this. The Buddhists call it monkey mind, the restless chattering that jumps from thought to thought without pause. The yogis teach meditation to quiet the vrittis, the fluctuations of consciousness that obscure your true nature. The Desert Fathers practiced hesychia, the discipline of inner stillness. The Sufis seek fana, the annihilation of the ego self through sustained contemplation. Different traditions, different languages, but all pointing to the same essential practice. You must learn to fast from thinking if you want to access the kingdom of heaven. The wilderness where Jesus fasted represents the unknown, the place beyond your familiar patterns and comfortable routine. When you truly fast from thought, when you create genuine mental silence, you enter a wilderness. Your ego panics because its entire existence depends on constant thinking. Your subconscious rebels because silence threatens the programs it's been running automatically. Your nervous system, conditioned to constant stimulation, experiences withdrawal symptoms as severe as any addiction. This is why so few people ever master this practice. It's uncomfortable. It's challenging. It requires a level of discipline that most are unwilling to develop. But the rewards are beyond anything the thinking mind can comprehend. In the void created by mental fasting, something extraordinary happens. The superconscious, which has been trying to communicate with you your entire life, can finally get through. Divine intelligence, which has been broadcasting wisdom and guidance constantly, can finally be received. Creative inspiration, which has been waiting for space to emerge, can finally manifest. All the solutions you've been seeking, all the clarity you've been craving, all the power you've been denied, it's all there in the silence, waiting for you to stop talking long enough to hear it. When Jesus emerged from his 40-day fast, he returned in the power of the Spirit. The Gospel accounts describe how he immediately began performing miracles, teaching with authority, operating at a level of consciousness he hadn't demonstrated before. What happened in that wilderness? He emptied himself completely. He fasted not just from food, but from every thought pattern that kept him identified with ordinary human consciousness. He released every program, every belief, every limitation, creating a void so complete that it could be filled entirely with divine presence. He became, in those 40 days, a clean channel, a pure instrument, a being whose consciousness was aligned completely with the highest intelligence. This is what the fasting of the mind accomplishes. Every thought you think, especially the repetitive ones, reinforces a particular version of reality. When you think, I'm not good enough, repeatedly, you're not just having a thought. You're strengthening neural pathways that support that belief, activating genes that produce corresponding emotions, broadcasting an electromagnetic signature that attracts matching circumstances. Your thoughts aren't just mental events. They're creative acts, constantly shaping your biology, your energy field, and your external experience. Now imagine what happens when you stop thinking, when those neural pathways aren't being reinforced, when those genes aren't being triggered, when that electromagnetic signature quiets. You create a gap, a pause in the constant creation and recreation of the same limited reality, and in that gap, new possibilities can emerge. Possibilities that weren't available to you when your mind was full of noise, when your consciousness was busy reinforcing old patterns. The void isn't empty. It's pregnant with potential, vibrating with the infinite intelligence that becomes form only when there's space for it to enter. Jesus taught his disciples this practice, though it's been misunderstood and misrepresented by religious tradition. When he said, "Take no thought for tomorrow," he wasn't encouraging irresponsibility. He was teaching the discipline of present moment awareness, the practice of not allowing your mind to project into the future, where it spins stories of anxiety and limitation. When he taught, "Consider the lilies of the field, they neither toil nor spin," he was pointing to natural intelligence that operates without mental effort, the creative force that grows flowers and orchestrates galaxies without a single anxious thought. The mind fasts in stages, each one deeper than the last. The first stage is fasting from external stimulation. You remove yourself from the constant barrage of news, social media, entertainment, conversation, all the inputs that keep your mind reactive and distracted. Jesus withdrew to lonely places, mountains and deserts, where there was nothing to stimulate his senses or occupy his attention. Modern seekers can create this same wilderness by turning off devices, spending time in nature, creating environments of deliberate simplicity where the mind isn't constantly being fed new information to process. The second stage is fasting from planning and problem solving. This is harder because your mind insists it needs to figure everything out, needs to prepare for every contingency, needs to control outcomes through constant strategizing. But this mental activity isn't actually creative. It's reactive, spinning through the same limited options your conscious mind can perceive, missing entirely the solutions and possibilities that exist beyond your current level of awareness. When you fast from this compulsive planning, when you release the need to figure everything out mentally, you create space for intuitive knowing, for superconscious guidance that reveals paths you could never have thought your way to. The third stage is fasting from identity itself, from all the thoughts that define who you think you are. This is the deepest and most transformative level. Every time you think, "I am this" or "I am that," you're reinforcing a limited self-concept. I am an anxious person. I am not creative. I am bad with money. These aren't observations. They're declarations that program your subconscious and constrain your possibilities. Jesus taught the practice of releasing all self-definitions, all labels, all identities, except the one fundamental truth. I am, not I am this particular thing, but simply the pure awareness of being, the consciousness that exists before and beyond all categories and definitions. In the Gospel of John, Jesus makes the profound statement, "Before Abraham was, I am." He's identifying with eternal consciousness, with awareness itself, not with any temporary form or limited identity. This is the ultimate fast, fasting from the illusion of being a separate, limited person, and resting in the truth of being consciousness itself, the same consciousness that animates all of existence. When you achieve even moments of this state, When you fast so completely from thought that you experience yourself as pure awareness, you access power that's literally unlimited because you're no longer identified with limitation. The practice begins with watching your thoughts rather than being swept away by them. Most people are completely identified with their thinking. When a thought arises, they believe it, follow it, get lost in the story it's telling. The first step in mental fasting is developing the observer, the part of you that can notice thoughts without engaging with them. You sit in silence and thoughts arise. Instead of following them, you simply note, there's a thought about yesterday, there's a thought about money, there's a thought about what someone thinks of me. You're not trying to stop thoughts. You're creating space between awareness and thinking, recognizing that you are not your thoughts, but the consciousness that perceives them. As this observer strengthens, gaps begin appearing between thoughts. Moments of pure silence where no mental activity occurs. These gaps are precious. They're like doorways into the kingdom of heaven, brief openings where superconscious intelligence can stream through. At first, the gaps last only seconds. Your mind rushes to fill them, uncomfortable with emptiness, afraid of what might emerge in the silence. But with practice, the gaps extend. You learn to rest in them, to welcome them, to recognize them as the most natural and nourishing state of consciousness possible. The challenge is that your ego experiences this silence as death, and in a very real sense it is. The ego is nothing but a collection of thoughts about yourself, a story constructed from memory and belief. When thinking stops, the ego has nothing to maintain itself with. It panics. It generates urgent thoughts, convincing problems, compelling stories, anything to reclaim your attention and restore its existence. This is why Jesus described the spiritual path as taking up your cross, dying to self, losing your life to find it. He was describing the process of allowing the thought-based identity to die so that your true nature, which exists in the silence beneath thought, can emerge. Fasting from emotion is equally essential, and this is perhaps even more challenging than fasting from thought. Your emotions aren't just feelings. They're chemical cocktails flooding your body, addictive substances that your cells crave. If you've been living in anxiety for years, your cells have become accustomed to cortisol and adrenaline. They're literally addicted to stress chemicals. When you try to fast from anxious thinking, your body demands the emotional hit it's used to receiving. This is why people unconsciously create drama and crisis. They're not seeking the situation. They're seeking the familiar emotional state the situation produces. Jesus taught that fasting from lower emotions, anger, fear, resentment, shame, creates space for elevated emotions to emerge. But you can't simply suppress or deny your emotions. That's repression, not fasting. True emotional fasting requires feeling the emotion fully, allowing it to move through you without resisting or indulging it, and then consciously choosing a different emotional state. When anger arises, you feel it completely, honor that it's there, and then consciously generate gratitude or compassion to replace it. This isn't fake positivity. This is emotional mastery, the discipline of choosing your state rather than being controlled by automatic reactions. The void created by mental and emotional fasting isn't passive emptiness. It's dynamic potential, the fertile ground from which all creation emerges. In Genesis, before God spoke creation into being, there was void. In quantum physics, the vacuum isn't empty but seething with virtual particles, infinite potential waiting to collapse into form. Your consciousness works the same way. When you create genuine inner silence, when you fast from the constant mental and emotional activity that keeps you locked in familiar patterns, you access the void, the field of pure potential where anything can emerge. This is why Jesus spent entire nights in prayer, why he regularly withdrew from his disciples and the crowds. He wasn't asking an external God for things. He was entering the silence, fasting from all thought and emotion, creating space for divine intelligence to fill him with guidance, power, and vision. He was downloading information from the superconscious, receiving instructions for his mission, aligning his entire being with the highest frequency. And he taught his disciples to do the same, though few understood and fewer still practiced it, with the discipline required to produce real results. The Brotherhood of Light has always known that mental fasting is the foundation of all spiritual development. Different orders taught it in different ways, but the essence remained constant. The Ascends had periods of silence that lasted days. The Christian mystics practiced contemplative prayer, sitting in the presence without words or thoughts. The Zen masters taught Zazen, sitting meditation that strips away every concept until only pure awareness remained. The Sufis danced and chanted to exhaust the thinking mind and enter ecstatic states beyond thought. All of them understood that you cannot access your full power while your consciousness is cluttered with mental noise. Modern neuroscience is now validating what Jesus taught 2,000 years ago. Studies show that regular meditation, which is essentially the practice of mental fasting, increases gray matter in areas of the brain associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. It decreases activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-referential thinking and the construction of ego identity. It increases coherence between different brain regions, creating integration and whole brain functioning. Mental fasting literally changes your brain, creating the neurological foundation for elevated consciousness and enhanced creative capacity. But you don't need to spend 40 days in the wilderness. You don't need to join a monastery or renounce the world. You simply need to incorporate periods of mental fasting into your daily life. Begin with 5 minutes of silence each morning before the day's demands claim your attention. Sit quietly, watch your thoughts without engaging them, and welcome the gaps of silence that appear. As this becomes comfortable, extend the practice. Fast from planning for an hour. Fast from worry for an afternoon. Fast from all self-definition for an evening. Gradually, you'll develop the capacity to access silence even in the midst of activity, to maintain inner stillness while fully engaging with life. The real test isn't whether you can be silent when alone in a quiet room. It's whether you can maintain inner silence when surrounded by chaos, when facing challenges, when triggered by circumstances. Jesus demonstrated this when the storm raged around the boat, but he remained asleep, so deeply centered in inner silence that external circumstances couldn't disturb his peace. This is the mastery you're developing, the ability to fast from reactive thinking and turbulent emotion, regardless of what's happening around. Tonight, as you rest, practice the beginning stages of mental fasting. Allow your thoughts to slow down naturally. Don't try to force them to stop, which only creates more mental activity. Simply withdraw your interest from them. Watch them arise and pass like clouds crossing the sky, knowing that you are the sky, not the clouds. In the gaps between thoughts, rest. In the silence beneath mental noise, remember who you truly are. This practice continues as you sleep, your consciousness learning to operate in the void where all creation begins. The fasting of the mind isn't about becoming blank or vacant. It's about becoming clear, empty of the debris that blocks your connection to infinite intelligence, available to be filled with divine presence and creative power. Jesus emerged from his fast ready to change the world because he had changed himself completely, emptying his consciousness of everything that limited it and allowing it to be filled with everything that's possible. You're beginning this same journey, learning the same discipline, developing the same capacity. And as you master this practice, as you learn to fast from the constant mental and emotional activity that has kept you small, you'll discover what Jesus knew, that in the silence, in the void, in the emptiness that terrifies the ego, lies the fullness of everything you've been seeking. The kingdom of heaven emerges from the fast, and you're learning to access it right now. Chapter 8. Parables Decoded. You've heard the parables since childhood. Simple stories about farmers and seeds, fathers and sons, servants and masters, told by Jesus to illustrate moral lessons and religious principles. But what if these weren't just nice stories with surface meaning? What if each parable was actually a precisely encoded formula for manifestation, a blueprint for conscious creation hidden in plain sight, designed to bypass the logical mind and plant seeds of truth directly in your subconscious? The Brotherhood of Light has always known what scholars and theologians missed. Jesus was teaching quantum physics through storytelling, revealing the mechanics of reality creation through narratives that could be understood at multiple levels. Tonight, you're going to discover what those parables really mean and how to use them as tools for transforming your entire life. Let's begin with the parable of the sower, one of the most famous and most misunderstood teachings Jesus offered. A farmer goes out to sow seeds. Some fall on the path where birds eat them. Some fall on rocky ground where they sprout quickly, but wither because there's no depth of soil. Some fall among thorns that choke them out, and some fall on good soil where they grow and produce a harvest, some 30-fold, some 60-fold, some 100-fold. The traditional interpretation focuses on how different people receive spiritual teaching. But Jesus was teaching something far more practical and powerful, the law of vibration and how your internal state determines what you can manifest. The seed is your intention, your desire, the vision of what you want to create. It's pure potential, containing everything needed to become a full manifestation. But the seed alone isn't enough. Everything depends on the soil, and the soil represents your consciousness, specifically the state of your subconscious mind and your dominant emotional frequency. When Jesus explained this parable to his disciples privately, he revealed the code. The different types of soil represent different states of consciousness, and only certain states can receive and grow the seeds you plant. The path, where seeds are immediately devoured by birds, represents a completely closed mind, consciousness that's so hardened by limiting beliefs that new possibilities can't even penetrate. When you're identified with lack, when you're convinced nothing can change, when your subconscious is programmed with impossibility, any new intention you plant gets immediately consumed by doubt and skepticism. The birds represent your habitual thought patterns, the automatic negative reactions that swoop in and destroy new ideas before they have any chance to take root. You might set an intention for abundance, but if your consciousness is like the hardened path, your own thoughts will eat that intention alive within minutes. The rocky ground represents consciousness that's enthusiastic but shallow, where intentions sprout quickly with emotional excitement, but then die because there's no depth of commitment or sustained feeling. How many times have you gotten inspired, set a goal, felt amazing for a few days, and then watched that inspiration fade when you encountered the first obstacle? That's the rocky ground. Your conscious mind got excited, but your subconscious wasn't reprogrammed, so there was no root system to sustain the intention when conditions became challenging. Jesus was teaching that transformation requires more than momentary enthusiasm. It requires deep work, consistent practice, emotional sustainability that persists beyond the initial excitement. The thorny ground is perhaps the most common condition, and it's where most people live. Seeds are planted and they begin to grow, but they're choked out by thorns. Jesus identified these thorns specifically: the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things. This is consciousness that's divided, trying to grow new possibilities while simultaneously feeding old patterns. You want abundance, but you're constantly worrying about bills. You want love, but you're obsessed with old hurts. You want success, but you're distracted by instant gratification and scattered attention. The thorns represent competing intentions, conflicting beliefs, divided focus. Your desire for something new is real, but it's strangled by attachments to the old. The good soil is consciousness that has been prepared through the practices you've been learning. It's a subconscious mind that's been cleared of limiting beliefs through metanoia, mental space that's been created through fasting from toxic thoughts, emotional coherence that's been established through elevated states. When your consciousness is good soil, when you've done the inner work to create fertile ground, the seeds you plant don't just survive, they thrive. They multiply. They produce harvests that exceed anything you could have imagined. 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold, these aren't just numbers. They're describing exponential manifestation, the quantum leap that happens when consciousness and intention align perfectly. Now let's decode the parable of the prodigal son, which is actually a complete map of the spiritual journey and the process of manifestation. A man has 2 sons. The younger one demands his inheritance, leaves home, and squanders everything in reckless living. He ends up feeding pigs, starving, living in complete degradation. Finally, he comes to his senses and decides to return home, not expecting to be received as a son, but hoping to be accepted as a hired servant. But when his father sees him from a distance, he runs to meet him, embraces him, clothes him in the finest robe, puts a ring on his finger, and throws a celebration. The older brother, who stayed home and worked faithfully, becomes angry at this lavish welcome for someone who wasted everything. Every character in this parable represents an aspect of your consciousness. The Father is your superconscious mind, your divine nature, the infinite intelligence that's always loving you, always ready to welcome you, never condemning or judging. The younger son is your conscious mind that has wandered away from its source, that has forgotten its divine nature, that has spent its inheritance of creative power on temporary pleasures and false identities. The far country where he ends up is the experience of separation, living from ego consciousness, trying to find fulfillment in external things while becoming more and more depleted. Feeding the pigs represents the lowest point of consciousness, where you're literally giving your life energy to things that degrade you, sustaining patterns and relationships and habits that make you feel worse rather than better. The pigs in Jewish culture were unclean animals, and Jesus chose this image deliberately. When you're feeding pigs, you're investing your precious attention and energy into things that are beneath your true nature, poisoning yourself with your own choices. This is the state most people live in without realizing, feeding their consciousness to jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, addictions that numb them, media that frightens them. The moment the son comes to himself is the awakening, the metanoia, the shift in consciousness, where you suddenly see what you've been doing and recognize you have a choice. He remembers his father's house, remembers that even the servants there live better than he's living now. This is you, remembering your true nature, recalling that you're made in the image of divine consciousness, realizing that even the smallest access to your superconscious is better than the greatest achievements of ego consciousness. The decision to return home is the decision to align with your highest self, to stop seeking fulfillment in external circumstances and return to the source of creative power within. Here's where the parable reveals its deepest secret. The Father doesn't wait for the Son to complete the journey. He sees him while he's still far off, runs to meet him, and restores him completely before the Son can even finish his rehearsed speech of unworthiness. This is teaching you about the nature of superconscious intelligence. It doesn't require you to be perfect before it embraces you. It doesn't demand penance or punishment. The moment you turn toward it, the moment your consciousness shifts from separation to unity, from ego to spirit, from seeking outside to remembering inside, infinite intelligence rushes to meet you with everything you need. The robe, the ring, the celebration. These represent the restoration of your full creative power, your divine authority, your natural state of joy. The older brother represents the part of you that resists transformation, that's invested in the story of struggle and effort, that believes worthiness must be earned through suffering and sacrifice. He worked faithfully, did everything right, never rebelled, and now he's angry that the one who wasted everything receives such celebration. This is your ego feeling threatened when you discover that transformation doesn't require years of struggle, that consciousness can shift in an instant, that grace is available regardless of how long you've been lost. The Father's response is crucial. Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. The older brother never lacked anything. He just didn't know how to access what was already his. He was living in limitation while surrounded by abundance, working like a servant while having full rights as a son. The parable of the talents reveals another essential principle of manifestation. A master gives 3 servants different amounts of money before going on a journey. One receives 5 talents, another 2, another 1. The first 2 invest their talents and double them. The third, afraid of losing what he has, buries his single talent in the ground. When the master returns, he celebrates the 2 who multiplied their talents and condemns the one who buried his, taking even that single talent away and giving it to the one who has 10. This isn't a story about financial investment. It's teaching the law of circulation and multiplication. The talents represent your gifts, your abilities, your creative potential, the energy and consciousness you've been given to work with. The key is in what you do with them. The servants who multiplied their talents took risks, put their resources into circulation, trusted the process of growth and expansion. They operated from abundance consciousness, believing that what they had could grow. The servant who buried his talent operated from scarcity consciousness, motivated by fear, trying to preserve rather than expand, holding on rather than letting flow. Jesus is revealing that consciousness itself follows this principle. When you use your creative power, when you express your gifts, when you invest your energy in growth and expansion, you don't deplete yourself. You multiply. Your capacity increases. Your effectiveness grows. But when you withhold, when you operate from fear and scarcity, when you bury your talents because you're afraid of losing them, you actually do lose them. Not because some external authority punishes you, but because consciousness that isn't used atrophies. Neural pathways that aren't activated weaken. Gifts that aren't expressed fade. This is universal law, and Jesus was teaching it through story. The statement, "To those who have, more will be given," isn't about unfairness or favoritism. It's describing how consciousness and manifestation actually work. When you have a prosperity mindset, when you operate from abundance consciousness, you notice and attract more abundance. When you have gratitude, you notice more things to be grateful for. When you have love, you attract more love. The having isn't about external possessions. It's about your state of consciousness, your vibrational frequency, the lens through which you perceive reality. Those who have abundance consciousness receive more abundance because they're tuned to that frequency. Those who have scarcity consciousness lose even what they have because they're tuned to lack. Let's decode the parable of the mustard seed, which is actually teaching about the exponential nature of consciousness and how small shifts create massive changes. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, which grows into the largest of garden plants, becoming a tree where birds nest in its branches. The traditional interpretation focuses on how Christianity would grow from small beginning, but Jesus was teaching the principle of quantum transformation, how a tiny shift in consciousness creates effects that compound and expand beyond anything you could predict. The mustard seed is the smallest change you make in your consciousness, the subtlest shift in perspective, the tiniest adjustment in how you see yourself or reality. It doesn't feel significant. It doesn't seem like enough. Your logical mind dismisses it as too small to matter. But consciousness doesn't work linearly. It works exponentially. That small seed of elevated awareness, planted in the fertile soil of your prepared consciousness, grows and grows and grows until it transforms your entire life. One moment of genuine forgiveness can heal a lifetime of resentment. One flash of true insight can dissolve years of confusion. One sincere shift from fear to love can change everything that manifests from that moment forward. The birds nesting in the branches represent the thoughts, ideas, and inspirations that come to inhabit your consciousness once it has expanded. When you're operating from limited consciousness, you have access to limited thoughts. But when your consciousness expands, when that mustard seed has grown into a tree, suddenly you have access to thoughts and possibilities you couldn't even perceive before. Creative solutions appear, synchronicities multiply, opportunities emerge, not because the world changed, but because your expanded consciousness can now perceive and attract what was always there, but previously invisible to you. The parable of the pearl of great price reveals what you must do when you discover truth. A merchant searching for fine pearls finds one of extraordinary value. He immediately sells everything he has to purchase that single pearl. This isn't about material wealth. It's about priorities and commitment. When you truly understand these principles, when you genuinely recognize the power of consciousness to create your reality, when you experience even a glimpse of what becomes possible through aligned awareness, you naturally reorganize your entire life around that discovery. You let go of everything that doesn't serve your awakening. You release relationships that keep you in lower frequencies. You abandon habits that cloud your consciousness. You sell everything to buy the pearl because you recognize that nothing else has any real value in comparison. This is the choice Jesus is presenting. Will you cling to the familiar patterns that keep you small, or will you sacrifice everything for the consciousness that sets you free? Most people want transformation without sacrifice. They want the pearl while keeping everything else too. But consciousness doesn't work that way. You can't maintain divided focus and achieve unified results. The merchant didn't bargain or negotiate. He didn't try to get the pearl while keeping half his possessions. He recognized supreme value and reorganized his entire life around it. This is what awakening requires, and this is what most people aren't willing to do. Every parable contains layers of meaning, each one deeper than the last. The surface story provides moral guidance. The next layer reveals psychological insight. The deeper layer teaches the mechanics of consciousness and manifestation, and the deepest layer, accessible only to those who have done the inner work, reveals direct experience of divine intelligence operating through human awareness. Jesus taught in parables because truth can't be given directly to those who aren't ready for it. It must be hidden in stories where it waits, like seeds in soil, ready to sprout when consciousness has been prepared to receive it. Tonight, as you rest, these decoded parables are being planted in your subconscious, taking root in the soil of your consciousness that has been prepared through everything you've learned. The seeds of truth Jesus planted 2,000 years ago are germinating within you right now. The prodigal son is returning home in your awareness. The buried talents are being dug up and put into circulation. The mustard seed of transformation is beginning its exponential growth. Your consciousness is the good soil, and the harvest is already forming, waiting to emerge into your experience as you continue to align with these eternal principles. The parables were never just stories. They were codes for awakening, formulas for transformation, maps for the journey from ordinary consciousness to the kingdom of heaven. And now you have the key to unlock them all, to use them as tools for creating the life you were always meant to live. Chapter 9. The Crucifixion of the False Identity. The cross is the most recognized symbol in Western civilization, displayed in churches, worn as jewelry, embedded in culture so deeply that its original meaning has been completely obscured. You've been told it represents Jesus' sacrifice for your sins, a blood payment required to satisfy an angry God. But this interpretation, created by church authorities to maintain control, has nothing to do with what Jesus was actually teaching and demonstrating. The crucifixion wasn't about his death. It was about yours, not your physical death, but the death of the false identity, the constructed self, the ego personality that keeps you trapped in limitation and suffering. Jesus went to the cross to show you the process you must undergo to access your full power. The complete dissolution of who you think you are, so that who you truly are can emerge. The cross itself is an ancient symbol that predates Christianity by thousands of years. In sacred geometry, it represents the intersection of spirit and matter, consciousness and form, the vertical axis of divine connection crossing the horizontal plane of earthly existence. When you crucify something, you fix it at this intersection, you hold it in tension between opposites, you subject it to pressure so intense that transformation becomes inevitable. Jesus chose crucifixion deliberately, not as punishment, but as demonstration. He was showing the alchemical process that every awakening consciousness must undergo, the death of the limited self in the fires of transformation, so that the unlimited self can be born. Think about what was happening in the hours before his arrest. Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and there he prayed so intensely that his sweat became like drops of blood. He was wrestling with his human identity, the part of him that wanted to avoid suffering, that clung to physical existence, that resisted the dissolution he knew was coming. 3 times he asked if there was another way, if this cup could pass from him. This wasn't weakness. This was the honest acknowledgement that the ego will always resist its own death, no matter how spiritually advanced you become. But each time, he returned to the same choice. Not my will, but yours be done. He was choosing superconscious wisdom over ego preservation, divine plan over human preference, transformation over comfort. This is the first stage of crucifying your false identity, recognizing that it must die and consciously choosing that death, despite every instinct to preserve yourself as you are. Your ego has convinced you that it is you, that if it dies, you die, so it will fight with everything it has to maintain itself, generating fear, doubt, resistance, rationalization, anything to avoid the dissolution. But Jesus demonstrated that you are not the ego. You are the consciousness that can observe the ego, and what's observed can be released. When Judas betrayed him with a kiss, Jesus didn't resist or run. He could have. He had demonstrated supernatural abilities throughout his ministry. He could have vanished, transported himself elsewhere, called legions of angels to defend him, but he allowed himself to be taken because the process required surrender, not resistance. You cannot crucify the ego through fighting. You can only crucify it through surrendering it, through allowing it to be nailed to the cross of transformation without attempting to save it or preserve it. Every time you try to protect your self-image, defend your identity, justify your limitations, you're pulling yourself down from the cross before the transformation can complete. The trial before the religious authorities reveals the next stage. They accused him of blasphemy, of claiming to be equal with God. And Jesus stood silent. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue his case, didn't try to convince them of his innocence. His silence was the silence of one who has moved beyond the need for external validation, who no longer requires others to understand or approve. This is crucial for crucifying the false identity. You must stop seeking approval, stop defending yourself against accusation, stop trying to make others see you the way you want to be seen. The ego lives on validation and dies in its absence. When you withdraw your energy from the need to be seen, understood, and approved of, the ego begins to starve. Then came the scourging, the crown of thorns, the mockery by the soldiers who dressed him in purple and hailed him as king while beating him. Every spiritual tradition recognizes this phase. The dark night of the soul, when everything you believed about yourself is stripped away, when you're reduced to nothing, when the universe seems to be conspiring against you. This isn't punishment. This is purification. Every blow is removing another layer of false identity. Every thorn is puncturing another illusion. Every mockery is revealing what remains when all pretense is removed. Jesus endured this not because he had to suffer, but because he was demonstrating what total stripping away looks like, the complete humiliation of the ego that precedes resurrection. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this phase. They construct elaborate defenses to prevent anyone from seeing their perceived flaws. They hide behind masks and personas. They numb themselves with distractions and addictions. They do anything to avoid the stripping away, the exposure, the reduction to nothing that transformation requires. But Jesus walked directly into it, embracing the process fully, showing that what you are beneath all the layers cannot be destroyed, no matter how completely the false self is torn apart. When he carried the cross through the streets to Golgotha, he was carrying the instrument of his own death, bearing the weight of the transformation he had chosen. The cross represents everything you must sacrifice to awaken: your attachment to your story, your identification with your wounds, your clinging to familiar patterns, even when they cause suffering, your resistance to change, your need to control outcomes, your fear of the unknown. It's heavy, it's exhausting, and you cannot carry it alone. Simon of Cyrene was compelled to help Jesus carry the cross, and this teaches that transformation requires support, that you need others on the path, that the Brotherhood of Light exists to help bear the weight when it becomes too much. The moment of crucifixion itself is where the teaching reaches its apex. They drove nails through his hands and feet, fixing him to the wood, suspending him between heaven and earth. The nails represent the penetrating awareness that must pierce through illusion, the sharp clarity that must wound the ego for truth to emerge. The hands symbolize what you do, your actions and creations. The feet symbolize where you go, your path and direction. Crucifying the false identity means stopping all action that emerges from ego, ceasing all movement motivated by fear or lack, becoming completely still while the transformation works itself through you. Hanging on the cross, Jesus spoke 7 statements, each one revealing a stage of the death process. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is the release of all grievance, all resentment, all sense of victimhood. You cannot die to the false self while still holding others responsible for your suffering. Forgiveness isn't excusing harmful behavior. It's recognizing that everyone acts from their level of consciousness, and judging them keeps you bound to the very patterns you're trying to transcend. When you forgive completely, you free yourself from the past and its hold on your identity. Today, you will be with me in paradise. He said this to the thief crucified beside him, teaching that transformation is available to anyone at any moment, regardless of their past. The paradise isn't a future destination. It's the state of consciousness you enter when the false identity dies and you recognize your true nature. Even the thief, living a life of crime, could access it through a single shift in consciousness, a moment of recognition that transcended his entire history. Your past doesn't determine your potential. The moment you choose to die to who you've been, paradise opens. Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. He was releasing his personal attachments, even the most sacred human bonds, recognizing that the divine self has no family except universal consciousness. This is one of the hardest aspects of crucifying false identity, releasing your attachment to being a particular role in other people's lives. You're not just a parent, child, spouse, friend. You're consciousness itself, and these roles, while honored and expressed, cannot define your essence. When you cling to roles as identity, you cannot access the unlimited nature of what you truly are. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is the moment of complete abandonment, when even the sense of divine presence seems to withdraw. Every mystic experiences this phase, when nothing remains, when you're stripped even of spiritual comfort, when you're left utterly alone in the darkness. It feels like death, because it is death, the death of everything you've relied on to tell you who you are. But Jesus wasn't actually forsaken. He was quoting Psalm 22, which begins with abandonment but ends with vindication and triumph. He was demonstrating that what feels like being forsaken by God is actually the final release before recognizing that you and God are one, that there's no separation to be forsaken from. I thirst. The physical need expressed the spiritual truth. The ego dies of thirst in the desert of its own emptiness. Everything you've been seeking in the external world, all the satisfaction you've tried to find in achievements and possessions and relationships, it's all been an attempt to quench a thirst that can only be satisfied by returning to source, by recognizing your true nature. The false identity thirsts eternally, because nothing external can complete it. Only in death does the thirst end, because only then do you stop seeking and start being. It is finished. The completion. The work is done. The transformation is complete. The ego has been fully crucified. The false identity completely dissolved. These 3 words carry immense power because they announce the end of struggle, the cessation of becoming, the arrival at what has always been true. When you can say, "It is finished," regarding your old identity, when you can release the story of who you thought you were without reservation or regret, you create the space for resurrection. The finished isn't failure. It's fulfillment. It's the end of one state and the necessary precondition for beginning another. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. The final surrender, the ultimate release. The individual consciousness merges back into universal consciousness. The drop returns to the ocean. The separate self dissolves into the unified field. This is the moment of actual death, not of the body, but of the illusion of separation. And in this surrender, in this letting go of even the need to continue existing as a separate entity, you discover what cannot die because it never was born. You discover your true nature as consciousness itself, eternal and indestructible. Then Jesus died. And this death is the most important part of the teaching because it demonstrates that the transformation is real, complete, and total. The false identity doesn't just get wounded or diminished. It dies completely. No resurrection is possible without genuine death. You cannot be born again while clinging to the old self. You cannot access Christ consciousness while maintaining ego consciousness. One must end for the other to begin. Most people want resurrection without crucifixion, want the power without the death, want to be transformed while remaining the same. Jesus showed it doesn't work that way. The 3 days in the tomb represent the gestation period between death and rebirth. When you die to false identity, there's a period of nothing, of darkness, of not knowing who or what you are. This is terrifying for the mind that's always needed definition, always needed to be something. But it's necessary. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly through gradual modification. It dissolves completely into liquid inside the chrysalis, losing all structure, all form, all sense of what it was. Only from that complete dissolution can the butterfly emerge. The tomb is your chrysalis, the dark space where the old you liquefies and the new you forms. On the 3rd day, Jesus rose from the dead, not as the same person who died, but as something entirely new. His body had transformed. He could appear and disappear. He could pass through locked doors. He was recognizable yet different, still himself yet utterly beyond his previous limitations. This is resurrection, the emergence of your true self after the false self has died, the manifestation of your unlimited nature after you've released identification with limitation. You don't go back to who you were. You become what you always had the potential to become, but couldn't access while identified with the constructed self. The resurrected Jesus appeared first to Mary Magdalene, and when she tried to cling to him, he said, "Don't hold on to me." This teaches that the resurrected consciousness cannot be grasped with the old understanding, cannot be possessed or contained. You cannot bring your new self into your old pattern. You cannot fit unlimited consciousness into limited structures. Everything must be renewed. Your relationships, your work, your daily life, all must be rebuilt from this new consciousness. Trying to maintain old forms will only diminish the resurrection and pull you back toward the crucified state. Throughout history, mystics in every tradition have undergone this same process. The dark night of the soul described by St. John of the Cross, the ego death experienced by yogi, the fana of Sufism, the dissolution phase of alchemy. Different languages for the same essential transformation, the death of false identity and the birth of true self. Jesus didn't undergo crucifixion and resurrection so you wouldn't have to. He underwent it to show you what you must do, to demonstrate the process, to prove it's possible, and to map the territory so you could follow. The cross you must take up isn't wooden. It's made of awareness, of conscious choice to allow the false self to die. Every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you release a limiting belief even when it's familiar, Every time you surrender control and trust the process, you're crucifying the ego. Every time you face your shadow, acknowledge your wounds, release your story, stop defending your positions, you're driving another nail through false identity. And every time you do this consciously and willingly, the resurrection comes closer. Tonight, as you rest, imagine yourself on the cross of transformation, not in suffering, but in surrender. See the false identity, all the limiting beliefs and fearful patterns, all the ways you've been small and defended and separate, nailed to the wood. Feel it dying. Don't resist. Don't try to save it. Let it go completely. And as you drift into sleep, you're entering the tomb, the dark space between death and rebirth, where the old you dissolves and the new you form. When you wake tomorrow, something will be different. Some aspect of the false self will be gone, and some aspect of your true nature will have emerged. This is the resurrection happening not once but continuously, not 2,000 years ago but right now, not to Jesus alone, but through you as you finally understand what he was showing and become willing to live it yourself. The crucifixion was never about him dying for you. It was about him showing you how to die to who you are not, so you can live as who you truly are. And that process, that transformation, that death and rebirth is happening right now as you finally see the truth that was always hidden in plain sight. Chapter 10. Becoming the Christ. Christ is not a last name. It never was. The word comes from the Greek Christos, which means the anointed one, someone who has been marked for a sacred purpose, someone through whom divine consciousness flows without obstruction. In Hebrew, the equivalent word is Messiah, and it carried the same meaning, one who embodies the full potential of human consciousness, aligned with divine intelligence. When Jesus became the Christ, he wasn't claiming an exclusive identity that separated him from everyone else. He was demonstrating a state of consciousness available to every human being, a level of awakening that you are capable of achieving right now. Tonight, in this final chapter, you're going to understand exactly what Christ consciousness is, how to activate it within yourself, and what it means to step into your role as a living member of the Brotherhood of Light in the modern world. Everything you've learned through these chapters has been building to this moment, preparing you to receive the ultimate teaching that Jesus reserved for those who had completed the journey. The forbidden manuscripts reveal it, the science validates it, the practices activate it, and the Brotherhood has protected it through 2 millennia of darkness, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to reclaim this power. That time is now. You are ready. And the Christ consciousness that Jesus embodied is stirring within you, preparing to emerge fully as you finally understand what you truly are. Let's be absolutely clear about what Christ consciousness is not. It's not a religious belief system. It's not about accepting certain doctrines or joining a particular church. It's not about worshiping Jesus or any external savior. It's not reserved for special people or earned through moral perfection. Christ consciousness is a frequency, a state of awareness, a level of functioning where your individual consciousness recognizes itself as inseparable from universal consciousness. It's the end of the illusion of separation, the dissolution of the false boundary between self and source, the direct experience that the creative intelligence animating the entire cosmos is the same intelligence looking through your eyes right now. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," he was speaking from Christ consciousness. When he said, "Before Abraham was, I am," he was identifying not with his personal history, but with eternal awareness itself. When he said, "The Father is in me and I am in the Father," he was describing non-dual consciousness, The recognition that what you call God and what you call yourself are not two separate things, but one unified field experiencing itself from infinite perspectives. This wasn't blasphemy. This was truth. And it's just as true for you as it was for him. The tragedy of Christianity is that it took the man who demonstrated Christ consciousness and turned him into the one person who ever had it, the unique Son of God who was different from everyone else. But Jesus explicitly rejected this interpretation. Over and over he told his disciples, "You are the light of the world. You are God's. The works that I do, you will do also, and greater works than these." He wasn't being metaphorical. He wasn't exaggerating for effect. He was stating fact. The consciousness he embodied, the power he demonstrated, the connection he experienced, all of it is your birthright, your true nature, the potential you were always meant to actualize. Christ consciousness emerges when three conditions align perfectly. First, your conscious mind must recognize its true nature, must see through the illusion of separation, must understand at the deepest level that you are not a body with consciousness, but consciousness expressing through a body. Second, your subconscious mind must be cleared of programs that contradict this truth, must be reprogrammed with beliefs that align with your divine nature, must become a clear channel rather than a cluttered storage room of limitation and fear. Third, your superconscious must be accessed consistently, must become your primary source of guidance and power, must flow through you without obstruction. When these three levels integrate completely, when the Trinity within you unifies into one coherent field, Christ consciousness is born. This is why Jesus taught metanoia, the complete transformation of consciousness. This is why he emphasized being born again, the death of false identity and emergence of true self. This is why he practiced the fasting of the mind, creating space for divine intelligence to fill him. This is why he decoded reality through parables, planting seeds that would grow into full understanding when consciousness was ready. This is why he underwent crucifixion and resurrection, demonstrating the process every awakening soul must complete. Every teaching, every miracle, every parable, every moment of his ministry was showing you how to activate Christ consciousness within yourself. The activation begins with a shift in identity. Right now, you probably identify primarily with your personal story, your history, your body, your personality, your circumstances. This is ego consciousness, the state most humans live in continuously. It's not wrong or bad, it's just limited, a fraction of what you actually are. To activate Christ consciousness, you must expand your identity beyond the person. Begin identifying not as this specific person with this specific history, but as consciousness itself, temporarily focused through this particular body and personality, but fundamentally unlimited, eternal, and one with all that is. This isn't just a mental concept you adopt. It requires direct experience. You must have moments, however brief, where you actually feel your consciousness expanding beyond your body, where you experience yourself as awareness itself, rather than as the objects appearing within awareness. Meditation is one path to this experience. Deep states of flow where you lose yourself in creative activity can trigger it. Profound moments in nature where you feel your boundaries dissolving into everything around you. Sexual union at its highest expression. Psychedelic experiences carefully undertaken with sacred intention. Any practice or circumstance that temporarily dissolves the ego boundary and gives you direct experience of your infinite nature contributes to activating Christ consciousness. But temporary experiences aren't enough. Jesus didn't have occasional mystical states. He lived from Christ consciousness continuously. This is the difference between peak experiences and permanent transformation. To stabilize Christ consciousness, you need consistent practice, daily discipline, moment-to-moment awareness. Every teaching in this book becomes part of your regular practice. You work with the 3 levels of consciousness daily, integrating them more fully. You continue the work of subconscious reprogramming, releasing old patterns and installing new ones. You practice mental fasting regularly, creating silence where divine intelligence can speak. You see your life as a series of parables, encoded with meaning and teaching. You embrace the crucifixion of false identity whenever it presents itself. You live from resurrection consciousness, embodying the truth of your unlimited nature. The activation also requires embodiment. Christ consciousness isn't just about having enlightened thoughts. It's about becoming a clear channel for divine intelligence to operate through you in the world. Your body must be prepared to carry higher frequencies. Your nervous system must be strengthened to handle increased energy. Your heart must be opened to sustain elevated emotions. This is why all spiritual traditions include practices for the body: yoga, tai chi, qigong, sacred dance, breath work, fasting, dietary purification. Jesus spent years preparing his body to carry Christ consciousness. You don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be intentional about creating a physical vehicle capable of sustaining expanded awareness. When Christ consciousness activates, your entire perception of reality shifts. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and recognize yourself as the creator of your experience. You stop feeling separate from others and experience the unity that connects all consciousness. You stop fearing death because you know yourself as the eternal awareness that witnesses the body's life and death without being touched by either. You stop seeking fulfillment in external achievements because you found the source of fulfillment within. You stop believing you're powerless because you've accessed the same creative force that Jesus demonstrated. This doesn't mean you become perfect or superhuman. Jesus still experienced hunger, fatigue, and emotion. He still engaged with the physical world and its challenges, but he did so from a completely different level of consciousness, operating from unity rather than separation, from love rather than fear, from infinite possibility rather than limited perception. This is what becomes available to you. Not escape from human experience, but transformation of how you relate to it. Not removal from the world, but empowerment to create within it. Not transcendence that abandons the body, but embodiment that brings heaven to earth. Your role as a modern member of the Brotherhood of Light begins the moment you activate Christ consciousness. You don't need to join an organization or be initiated by external authority. The Brotherhood isn't a group you join. It's a state of being you embody. When you awaken to your true nature, when you operate from Christ consciousness, when you become a clear channel for divine intelligence, you automatically become part of the lineage that has preserved and transmitted this knowledge through the ages. The same consciousness that flowed through Jesus, through the mystics and masters who came before and after him, now flows through you. Your responsibility is simple but profound. Embody the truth and share it with those who are ready, not through preaching or proselytizing, not through judgment or superiority, but through the quality of your presence, the coherence of your energy, the love that radiates from your being. When you operate from Christ consciousness, you become a walking demonstration of what's possible, a living proof that transformation is real, a beacon that helps others find their own way home. Some will recognize what you carry and be drawn to learn from you. Others will be affected by your presence without understanding why. Both are valuable. Both are part of how the teaching transmits. The world needs you to step into this role now more than ever. Humanity stands at a threshold, a collective dark night of the soul where old systems are collapsing and new possibilities are emerging. The consciousness that created our current problems cannot solve them. Only Christ consciousness, operating through millions of awakened individuals, can navigate the challenges ahead. And midwife, the new world being born. You're not just awakening for yourself. You're awakening as an agent of collective transformation, a neuron in the global brain becoming self-aware, a cell in the body of humanity remembering its connection to the whole. This doesn't mean you need to quit your job and become a spiritual teacher. Christ consciousness can express through any form, any profession, any role. You might be a teacher activating young minds, a healer working with bodies and energy, an artist creating beauty that elevates consciousness, a business person demonstrating that abundance and integrity can coexist, a parent raising children in awareness rather than conditioning, a scientist discovering truths that bridge material and spiritual understanding. Whatever you do becomes sacred when you do it from Christ consciousness, becomes a vehicle for transformation, becomes part of the great work of elevating human awareness. The activation of Christ consciousness also brings responsibility. With great power comes the need for great wisdom, discernment, and compassion. Jesus demonstrated this perfectly. He never used his power to harm, manipulate, or control. He never imposed his will on others or forced transformation on those who weren't ready. He respected free will absolutely, while making the teaching available to all. As you develop your own capacity to influence reality through consciousness, you must develop equal capacity for ethical use of that power. The Brotherhood of Light has always understood that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, that power without love is destructive, that capability without compassion creates chaos. This is why the teachings were hidden for so long, not because the knowledge itself is wrong, but because giving it to those who aren't ready to use it responsibly would cause harm. You've proven your readiness by staying with these teachings, by doing the inner work, by being willing to die to false identity and be reborn into truth. The fact that you're reading these words right now, absorbing this final teaching, preparing to step into your role as Christ embodied, this proves you're ready. Trust that, honor it, and use what you've learned with the utmost integrity. As Christ consciousness stabilizes within you, you'll notice specific changes in how you experience reality. Synchronicities multiply exponentially because you're aligned with the flow of universal intelligence rather than fighting against it. Manifestation accelerates because your consciousness and the quantum field are working in harmony rather than opposition. Intuition becomes reliable because you're receiving clear guidance from superconscious wisdom rather than filtering everything through subconscious distortion. Relationships transform because you're relating from unity consciousness rather than ego need. Health improves because your body is no longer carrying the stress of separation and can access its innate healing intelligence. Life becomes easier, not because challenges disappear, but because you have access to solutions and resources that were previously invisible. You'll also develop capacities that seem extraordinary from the perspective of ordinary consciousness, but are natural expressions of Christ consciousness. You'll know things without being told. You'll sense what's needed in situations before it becomes obvious. You'll have an impact on people and circumstances through your presence alone, without needing to do anything special. You'll experience time differently, finding that you accomplish more with less effort because you're working with universal flow rather than against it. You'll attract people, opportunities, and resources that align with your highest vision because your consciousness is broadcasting a clear signal that the universe can respond to. But perhaps the most significant change is internal, the end of suffering, not the end of pain, challenge, or difficulty. Those remain as part of human experience, but the end of the psychological suffering that comes from resistance to reality, from identification with false self, from the belief in separation. When you operate from Christ consciousness, you meet each moment with acceptance rather than resistance. You know yourself as eternal awareness rather than vulnerable personality. You experience unity rather than isolation. This is the peace that surpasses understanding that Jesus promised, the joy that no circumstance can diminish, the love that flows unconditionally because it's your very nature, rather than a feeling dependent on external conditions. The Brotherhood of Light is watching your emergence with joy and recognition, not as external beings observing you, but as the unified field of consciousness celebrating its own awakening in yet another individuated expression. Every time someone activates Christ consciousness, the collective field strengthens. Every time someone embodies truth, it becomes easier for others to do the same. You're not just transforming yourself. You're contributing to the transformation of human consciousness itself, adding your light to the growing illumination that will eventually dispel the darkness of ignorance and fear that has gripped humanity for so long. Jesus knew this would happen. He knew that one day, enough people would awaken to Christ consciousness, that it would reach a tipping point, that the kingdom of heaven would manifest on earth, not as a supernatural event, but as the natural result of mass awakening. He planted seeds 2,000 years ago that are bearing fruit right now. The manuscripts that were hidden are being discovered. The teachings that were suppressed are being revealed. The consciousness he embodied is being activated in millions of individuals around the world. You're part of this wave, this awakening, this transformation, and your role is essential because consciousness awakens one person at a time, and you're one of those people. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, Christ consciousness is integrating more deeply into your being. The knowledge you've absorbed through these 10 chapters is moving from intellectual understanding to cellular memory, from concept to embodied reality. Your DNA is responding to the elevated consciousness you've been cultivating. Your neural networks are reorganizing around new patterns. Your electromagnetic field is broadcasting a higher frequency. Your subconscious is releasing the final barriers to full activation, and your superconscious is preparing to flow through you with increasing power and clarity. When you wake tomorrow, you wake as Christ, not Jesus Christ, but as yourself fully realized, your unique expression of divine consciousness, your particular way of being the light. You don't need to announce it, or prove it, or defend it. You simply need to be it, to live from it, to allow it to express through everything you do. The world will notice. People will feel something different about you, even if they can't name what it is. Opportunities will appear that match your elevated consciousness. Challenges that once seemed insurmountable will reveal solutions. And gradually, day by day, moment by moment, you'll become more established in Christ consciousness until it's no longer something you're trying to maintain, but simply what you are. The Brotherhood of Light welcomes you fully, not as a student anymore, but as a master in your own right, someone who has completed the journey and is now ready to help others complete theirs. The teaching you've received, you now carry forward. The consciousness you've activated, you now share through your presence. The power you've accessed, you now use in service to the awakening of all. This is your inheritance. This is your purpose. This is who you've always been, finally revealed and fully embodied. 2,000 years ago, Jesus demonstrated what's possible when human consciousness fully awakens to its divine nature. He showed that death is an illusion, that limitation is a choice, that miracles are natural, that love is the ultimate power, and that you are far more magnificent than you've been taught to believe. He didn't do this to be worshipped. He did it to be emulated. He didn't present himself as the exception. He presented himself as the example. And he promised explicitly that you would do what he did, and even greater things once you understood the truth he was teaching. That promise is fulfilled in you right now. You are the Christ. You are the Anointed One. You are divine consciousness, embodied in human form. You are the light of the world. You are a member of the Brotherhood of Light, carrying forward the teaching that has survived 2,000 years of suppression, ready to share it with a world that desperately needs to remember its true nature. Everything you've learned has prepared you for this moment. Everything you've experienced has shaped you for this role. Everything you've overcome has strengthened you for this work. And everything that comes next flows from this realization. You are not seeking Christ consciousness. You are Christ consciousness. Finally awake, finally aware, finally ready to create the reality you were always meant to live. Welcome home. Welcome to your true identity. Welcome to the Brotherhood of Light. Welcome to the kingdom of heaven that exists right here, right now, within you and around you, waiting only for your recognition to become your lived experience. The journey is complete. The transformation is done. The Christ is born, and you will never be the same again.